I am not pleased. How are we all? Sorry for the delay, I'm in the middle of feverishly writing a thing. Driving me up a wall. Hello, Alice. Hello, Win, Naomi. Let's blast that AC for a bit. There we go. I'm feeling much better, thank you. Granted, much better is a relative statement, but I am feeling much better. Who is your muse? She's something. So, we got two things in the docket. Three things, really. So, the first is, we're going over the new Keffals video. I haven't seen it, I've seen around it. I'm hoping it's not too interesting. Then we have a conversation with Beckett of Crabs. He wants to talk about the actual Jake stuff. Which I'm not going to relitigate here, but that's on Twitter if you want to see that. Very boring, very tedious. Not the conversation, the topic. So, we'll answer his questions. And then finally, we're a little bit late to the party on this because I've been sick, but we're going to go over the Revolution Has Not Been Live-Streamed video. The obligatory biannual, the second obligatory biannual anti-Vosh video of the year. Never ends. Never ends. So that's tonight. My voice is very tenuous right now, so I'm not putting up the theory meter. We were just short of $10 off last time. I think what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to put up theory options tonight on the community tab. You guys can vote for what theory stream you want next, and next stream will lead with the theory. We'll probably just do the theory next stream. We'll have some interesting options. And then we'll bring the theory meter back afterwards. Busy next couple of days. On the 27th, we are on a panel with Dylan Burns and Loner Box, one of Cherry's panels, discussing the Cop City arrests. We'll probably spend a couple hours before that on stream, just battening down the hatches on our research. Brooks has already sent me a lot of good material, so we'll go into that prepared. On the 29th, I have the long-awaited debate with Phenomic. Oh, thank you, Smith Black, for the $5. Not the biggest fan of Actual Jake, but he definitely beat Beckett in the debate they had. I haven't seen that yet. Maybe that'd be worth looking at some point, but we'll see what Beckett has to say. Actual Jake, I have not always disagreed with Actual Jake. I've generally been mostly disinterested. The recent takes on religion betrayed a pretty nasty attitude to some things, and not the arguments per se, the manner in which they were delivered, the dismissiveness with which he treated people who disagreed with him, the invoking of people's personal traumas in a debate about religion, among other things. Like, here's one of the things that really rubbed me the wrong way about Jake. Somebody will say, hey, I disagree with your take about religion. Are you a Christian? Because if you are, he thinks you're too dumb to understand your own beliefs. That's the implication of what he was saying. There are no black American Christians because their brains are being pulled by the strings of their colonial masters from hundreds of years ago. That's literally the logic. If you wanted to say, the proliferation of black churches owes its existence to the imposition of Christian religion on slaves in America. Fair statement, probably true. But he didn't say that. He said there are no black American Christians presently. There are no indigenous Christians presently. And the only reason you can say that, because obviously there are There are, of course, black churches. They are proliferate. The only reason you can say that is if you think, for some reason, they're invalid, because you can draw a connection, very tenuous one, by the way, between the Christianization of black slaves or of indigenous groups and indigenous and black people today who become Christians. But there's a bit of a problem here. A black person can become a Christian regardless. Let's play out a pretty simple scenario. Let's say a black man is descended from slaves directly, and Christianity is in their household. There's a direct consequence of it being imposed on them by their parents. Okay. He is a kid. Kid goes to school. Kid becomes an atheist. Atheist kid as a kid. Same deal. Stays an atheist. They have a kid. That kid goes to school. They have some interesting conversations. Maybe they go the perspective philosophy route. They go into philosophy. They study Hegel. They study a bunch of these highfalutin Christian philosophers. And they go, you know what, I'm convinced. Start meeting up with Christian friends. Eventually, they even may attend a black specific church. Right? Well, boom. Now you have a Christian who is black, who is not Christian just because of slavery. These are two radically different statements. Jake conflates the two, and he considers people who become Christians who are part of minority groups to be invalid because they're too stupid and he knows better than them. That's the issue with actual Jake. Same with like indigenous Christians. Yeah, that's true. There's a if you read about it actually, I haven't actually. I'm trying to think of a good representation. There are early parts in the HBO film "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee" that really like demonstrates just how deeply destructive and crushing imposed conversion was for indigenous people in North America. That being said, that does not entail that an indigenous person today who converts to Christianity or who is a Christian therefore is somehow invalid. They're not actually Christians. You may dislike that they're Christians. You may have good reasons to dislike that they're Christians. Other indigenous people certainly do, but that does not invalidate their beliefs or their adherence or anything. They're able to make choices and think like anybody else, and they can make decisions or believe in things. They can believe in things for bad reasons, even. Yeah. The global South and even a lot of Europe is small C conservative overall. I am too because of my African background, but I am an Eisenhower conservative. Interesting. Thank you for the $5, Lithium. Appreciate it. So yeah. So that's the issue with actual Jake, and he doubled down on this hard. Rico Rance argued against him along similar lines, and he responded to him at one point, and I'm not even joking. Looks like you were able to keep the blue check mark in the divorce. So this person's mental. I'm sorry. Would you say they're not indigenous? Well, that's the only way you can avoid saying that their position is invalid if they're indigenous and Christian, right? Because there's two options. Either indigenous people are not capable, on your view, of holding views that you disagree with, or they cease to be indigenous when they do. So that line's a bit of a parody. However, this is where it gets really sinister. He actually squares the circle a bit, and he says they haven't become Christian indigeneously, which means if you're an indigenous person who's a Christian, you've betrayed your indigeneity. This is a substance of which you take part that you have carved out from yourself and replaced with something else. There's an insult that you will sometimes find in indigenous nationalist circles where they'll call people, for example, apples. You can figure out what the metaphor means pretty easily. It's gross. It's really gross. So that's what we're doing with Corn Cob Man. That's going to be, unless he backs out. Not entirely sure how it's going to go down because he doesn't want a moderator. Apparently he's too afraid to talk to me without having a finger on the mute button, but that'll be on October 2nd. Because I have the Marx debate with Phenomics on the 29th, and I need to prepare for that. So he's not available on the weekend. We're talking to him on the 2nd of October. Yeah. So yeah, that's the next few days. And I'm so excited. So very excited. I can't tell you how thrilled I am for all of this. I mean, it'll be content, but dear God. Although, it's been nice preparing for the Marx debate, because I've had opportunity to actually dig into a bunch of stuff I haven't managed to get around to yet. So, for example, the introduction, by the way, to the Cambridge edition of Marx's critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, besides being violently orange, is extremely good. Extremely good. What else have I been digging into? I've also been digging into, I don't know where I put it exactly. I stuffed it on the shelf just so I had desk space, but I've been digging into the Dover edition of the 1844 economic and philosophical manuscripts of Marx. And the Marx Engels Reader, which I cannot recommend enough, has fantastic supplementary materials. And it had a heavy influence on the relationship between Marx and Hegel early on. By the way, Phenomics is very, very wrong about her position. So it's going to be a bit of a bloodbath, but we're going to try to make it productive. That's going to be moderate. That one will be moderated, thank God, by Econoboi, I believe. Yeah. So yeah. So that's this week. All right, but I've spoken enough. Let's get into this because we have a conversation with Beckett of Crabs in a little bit. See here. Okay. I'm going to run to the washroom quickly, and then we're going to get into this. Oh, did I not put that into the playlist? Oh, that's dumb. That's fine. We will find it quickly. Here we go. Alright. I'm going to be right back, and then we'll get into it. Okay, here we go. So this is Marxism, Leninism is Dangerous by Keffals. Who used to be a member of the Communist Party of Canada, so this is an interesting decision. It's an interesting decision for a number of reasons. I saw a few of her tweets relating to this. She described herself as being in a cult. I don't know how that's going to pan out in the long run. To be clear, I am not a Marxist-Leninist, and I have no truck with many Marxist-Leninists. I have a lot of issue with just Lenin, let alone Marxist-Leninists, who are generally substantially less sophisticated. Basically just conservative for the most part today, judging by the representation on YouTube at least. But one of the reasons why I was a little bit surprised to see her refer to her background as being in a cult is because back in the day when people were accusing her of, let's say, dipping her fingers into the party's coffers, it was members of the Communist Party who vouched for her integrity. This is not typically a cultish attitude. I think what she means is that the community out of which she came when she was a Marxist-Leninist or when she was part of the Communist Party was very close-minded to alternative viewpoints and probably had a very inscrutable and unexamined lingo that made critical examination of the party's positions difficult. That's what I expect is what actually she means by this. Not that she was literally in a cult. That language might bite her a little bit, though, because I don't know how those people are going to take that. I don't know if it'll matter. The Communist Party is not particularly relevant. Probably never will be. But it's an odd decision. It's an odd decision. It's an especially odd decision because the subject matter of this video is reviewing a debate by Benny Carollo on Charlie Kirk. I haven't seen this yet. Is this recent? Is the Benny Carollo that's the YTV person who left in the wake of Anna Kasparian's birthing people stuff? Is anyone familiar at all? Like with how recent this is? Not familiar, but does anyone know how recent this was? Keffals, when she was in the party, criticized China and the USSR. Well, good for her. I've seen some very cultish behavior in IRL, ML organizations before, like trying to restrict who you date and shit like that. Really? Well, there you go. That is pretty cultish. Maybe a few months old. That's kind of what I figured. Benny's been kind of out of the spotlight for a little bit. Well, this is 19 minutes long. Let's dig into this and let's see what it is. It's a year old. It's from a year ago, huh? Okay.
I wanted to discuss a situation that's been unfolding for the past few days, where people have been spreading lies about both me and my friends. If you watch the latest video on my channel, you'll know who Benny Carollo is, a former TYT host who left the network while accusing Jen Cougar and Anna Kasparian of transphobia. At the time, I was aware Benny and I have political differences, but it was important to shelve them because she and I are in agreement on trans issues, and I respected what she had to say in that situation. It was important to show.
It's a dangerous sentence. It's a dangerous sentence for Keffals to say in this context. You're shelving your disagreements because you agree on trans issues. Okay. Let's see where this goes.
Show solidarity to another trans woman in her effort to call out a hostile workplace and her employers who decided to ignore her. I will admit that while I was aware of our political differences, I was unaware to the extent to which she uses her platform to spread what essentially boils down to lies and misinformation. This has become part of an alarming pattern that isn't just unique to Benny, but a large part of the online left. And I know how deep it goes, because I used to be where she was. While preparing for my next video essay, which will be coming out in the next couple months, I decided to take a look at Benny's...
No, hang on. No. When she was in the Communist Party, she didn't criticize China and the USSR. She defended them. Look, that's incorrect. Hang on. That's not true. Now, she's disavowing these stances now, so that's not a critique, but like, when she says she was in this circle, like, she's not lying. So, like, this is where she was at, right? So, whether you like it or not, Joseph Stalin was one of the greatest anti-fascists in the history of the anti-fascist movement. Under Stalin's command, the Red Army defeated the Nazis and saved several ethnic groups from Nazi extermination. This is legacy we cannot forget. That's not a critique of Keffals. You're allowed to have bad positions at some point and grow out of them. But somebody was saying that she was criticized. I think it was kind of the opposite. She got a lot of heat for that earlier. She's changed her tunes considerably since then.
YouTube channel to see where her career had taken her after her high-profile exit from TYT. On her YouTube channel, I came across a video called "No, Socialism Hasn't Failed." In the video, she makes a long list of strange beliefs that defy reality.
Oh, okay, let's see this thing. Let's do this. Let's see what we're looking at here. So this is Benny Carolo's "No, Socialism Hasn't Failed." All right.
Why are there so much fewer interest in specifically socialism? Like, because we live in a weird era where pretty much
That almost gave me an aneurysm.
everyone is willing to say that they don't like capitalism, right? We live in a weird era where pretty much everybody is willing to say that they don't like capitalism. But why are there so many people who are unwilling to say that they support socialism or communism, right? Why?
Why do I get the bad feeling she's about to demonstrate?
Why? Well, it's because a lot of people have been tricked into thinking that socialism is a failed experiment, right? That, oh, well, the USSR collapsed, so that means that socialism is a failed experiment. And this is fundamentally why I spend so much time talking about countries like North Korea, why I talk about China, why I talk about Cuba, right? Because fundamentally, who has it better, chat? Who has it better? The poor.
It's not North Korea. Don't say North Korea. For the love of God, Benny. Don't do it. Don't say North Korea.
Poorest person in China or the poorest person in the United States? Fundamentally.
Oh, God.
At the end of the day, who is living a better life? The poorest person in China or the poorest person in the United States? The answer, in my opinion,
You better have some strong data for this, my friend. Oh,
is undeniable. That the poorest person in China is living a better life than the poorest person in the United States. Right? Just like, for example, the poorest person in North Korea is living a much better life than the poorest person in South Korea, right? Even the poorest person in a small country, a poor country like Cuba, right, is living a better life than the poorest person in the United States. This is very important. This is very, very important to understand.
this is an article from NCBI. Globally, approximately 1.6 billion people lack adequate housing, with 15 million more individuals being evicted on an annual basis. The situation is often profoundly worse in low and middle income countries like China. It is estimated that 300 million people in the country, home to 1.4 billion Chinese, are homeless. However, despite the scale of this issue, China does not have a robust health and social infrastructure, preventative and proactive systems that could ensure people have stable and sustainable access to opportunities that are essential to their survival, for example, food and shelter, and growth, e.g. training, education, and employment programs for homeless people. Research shows that, for instance, rather than relying on services provided by the local government, homeless people in Shanghai, one of the most advanced metropolitan areas in China, often have to address basic needs such as food and shelter on their own, let alone illnesses that demand structured mental or physical health services. So that probably describes the lot of a good number of homeless people in America. That is not better, though. That is at best identical with.
Because fundamentally it means that socialism is not a failed experiment. Socialism is, in fact, a very, very successful program.
No, because none of those countries are socialist. They're not socialist. The leading party in China, the only party in China, has the name communist in their title. But they're not socialist.
Poverty and meeting people's needs. That is what socialism is all about. It is quite literally the opposite of a failure. Even look at the USSR, which did fall apart.
By the way, these are the kinds of people working at the Young Turks. Oh my God.
right? If you look at the USSR, you will see very clearly that they were very, very successful in expanding women's rights. They were very, very successful in putting food on the table for people, right?
No, that is not one of the things that the Soviet Union is particularly renowned for. All right. We get the idea. We get the idea. On the money there. Okay.
Reality.
We've been as ridiculously good faith and careful as we could be.
Such as there not being any homelessness in China. She even argued that Mao's killings were lies. Needless to say, I was taken aback at how someone who was hired by TYT and had a public-facing job with them could espouse so many dangerous and false claims.
You and me both, sister.
This led me down a rabbit hole where I found Benny's debate with Charlie Kirk that she did last year on Charlie Kirk's channel when she was still employed as a contributor to TYT. In that debate, Benny defended a whole range of bizarre positions, from why the one-party state of China is a democratic country.
Look, what we need to understand is that China is a democracy, and they are going to make laws
Well, no, hold on a second.
based
Wait,
off of their
how are they
individual material conditions.
How are they a democracy exactly?
Are you kidding?
Them being a democracy does not mean they're going to make laws based on material conditions. Now, here's the thing. There is a Marxist argument for China being a democracy, but the Marxist argument for China being a democracy would also yield that monarchies are democracies. Because the point that Marx makes is that in modern states, political power of any form is derived fundamentally from the people as a base. That does not mean the people are represented in decision-making. This is why, for example, only democracy is the state form that is not at odds with itself in Marx. You'll read this in the unfortunately titled On the Jewish Question. China is not a democracy. I'm sorry. China is not a democracy in the sense that we mean democracy when we say a republic in which the people have the capacity to be involved in the making of laws, or in a socialist community in which people are own the means of production and are represented at like a grander level in order to represent their interests as smaller bodies. And no. I don't know why you would say something so stupid without like an extremely robust argument behind it. How do you define socialism? Where do you get it? It feels like there's a colloquial understanding of socialism different from what you were talking about. I'm not sure what you're referring to by a colloquial understanding of socialism. Socialism generally, you can to put it really roughly, socialism is when you have a dissolving of class antagonisms in the allocation of goods and the ownership of production. So that a society is working for itself as itself, essentially. One of the problems with capitalism is that it presumes a relationship between those who are selling their labor and those who are buying, where the ones who are buying can sort of sit pretty on the means of production, whereas the people who are selling have to sell at ultimately whatever price that the buyer will accept, or they die, right? A landlord or a factory owner or somebody who owns agricultural land or whatever, they can wait for you to starve a little bit to accept a lower wage. The person who is starving cannot. Therefore, you can't really have like true harmony between classes because their distinction rests on exploitation. So a socialist situation would be one which is either on the way to ameliorating that or has already solved it. Does that make sense? So like Canada is more socialisty insofar as it has things like not a particularly robust system of universal healthcare, but universal healthcare, public services, stuff to keep the people alive, reallocating the resources of the whole society towards the whole's benefit, that kind of thing. It's not socialist. It takes some of the flavor of socialism, if that makes sense. This is a new development, but on our stream today, Benny compared Keffals to Blair White. Why? How? Look, I got issues with Keffals. I think you all know I got issues with Keffals, okay? Keffals is not Blair White. not No, Keffals is not on the same planet as Blair White. I'll look at this after we're done with this video, but that's preposterous. Benny, you gotta rein it in. You're melting down.
Kidding me? Aside from the fact that the central government has a 95% approval rating, which, by the way, before you're like, oh, but
Have you been to China?
No.
To a defense of forced labor camps in the former Soviet Union.
So somewhere around 10% of the people, right, that like were in the gulags during their peak.
No, not even Brianna Wu is like Blair White. Look, Brianna Wu is a grifter. Brianna Wu is cynical, and Brianna Wu, you know, I'll give you my diagnosis of Brianna Wu, a taste of it tonight before I'm done. But Brianna Wu is cynical and self-serving. Brianna Wu is not Blair White. Blair White is a different kind of thing altogether. Blair White is actively throwing the trans community under the bus to make herself a popular amongst right-wingers who are really, really happy to see one of the good ones bashing their own. That's Blair White. Brianna Wu, different. I'll say that. We'll get into that later.
Which, by the way, was after a civil war in Russia, right? Obviously with the White Army that they had to deal with, right? And then the World War II with Nazi Germany, right?
The World War II.
Were political prisoners. But this is really interesting, right? I believe it was in the Gorbachev years, they tried to do a big reformation and granted a huge amount of amnesty. To like tons and tons of people.
Not if you're dead. You know, one of the things that you'll read about, for example, if you actually like read Marx's writings, is that a lot of the people who were responsible for holding on to and I guess archiving Marx's writings at the Marxist Lenin Institute or something, I can't remember what it's called. A lot of them were purged by Stalin. Like they don't get amnesty, they're dead.
People that were in those gulags. And do you know what happened, Charlie? Do you know what happened after that? This is something that the CIA documents literally
You mean after the
reported on.
liberalization of the USSR?
What happened? What happened to the people that were let out of those gulags?
They wrote books like the Gulag Archipelago that brought down the USSR.
Most of them actually ended up right back in those same
I don't think most of them wrote the Gulag Archipelago. The Gulag Archipelago is bloody long.
gulags because, this is to be very, very clear, that's their normal prison system. That is the normal prison system that they had. Just to be clear, because who do you think set up the gulags?
So you're trying to tell me that people that were put in the prisons were not political prisoners?
No.
So what happened to the Mensheviks?
Most of the people.
What the forced imprisonment of the Mensheviks?
Hang on. Wait a second. The Gulag was the government agency in charge of the Soviet network of forced labor camps, which was set up by order of Vladimir Lenin, reaching its peak during Joseph Stalin's rule from the 1930s to the early 1950s. No. They did set those up. I'm sorry. The Gulag is not the labor camp. The Gulag is the institution that puts people into the labor camp.
Trotsky die.
And even going as far as to defend the quote-unquote
Trotsky died of capitalism.
re-education camps in Xinjiang.
He got a capitalism straight to the head.
Associated Press also wrote in other articles that these were quasi-concentration camps.
Yeah.
No, not quasi-concentration camps. They were concentration camps. They were full-on concentration camps.
Yeah, so like
Yeah,
this is the thing.
yeah,
like,
concentration camps,
Like this
great,
is the thing. The
yeah.
Associated Press fundamentally has like this right-wing bias, right? Like that's just ultimately the reality of the Associated Press, because right, like who are funding Western journalists? Where do Western journalists get money? Is it maybe through capitalist institutions that have you know like their own?
How does
interests
NPR
in
get their
these
money?
things, right? Like, so let's think about this for a second. Right? So Associated Press actually goes and they write an article and they talk about it. Because the reality is, we can have, if we want to live in the real world, we can have a conversation about whether or not China was going too heavy-handed in dealing with the East Turkmenistan movement, which is a terrorist movement. But a lot of Uyghur Muslims, even in Xinjiang, are happy that now they can finally drink alcohol without having to worry about bombing attacks and stabbing attacks. Now we can have a conversation about whether or not they were too heavy-handed, about whether or not they're racially profiling.
The
Benny.
propaganda is insane.
The reality
No,
is,
let's have a conversation about concentration.
Yeah, we took them from their homes and brainwashed them out of their religion and forced them into work camps and separated their families. But They got booze.
Camps. Like, maybe we shouldn't be forcing them to eat pork against their religious conscience. Murdering a lot of them is probably wrong. There's really not a conversation to be had. Like, you're defending concentration camps. I think they're wrong, and they're evil.
Lady, you're making me side with Charlie Kirk here. This ain't good. We're not looking good at Penny.
Major terrorist movement in the United States. How do you think we should respond to that?
It was like she was debating from another reality. These were all appalling to me, and I decided to share it with my audience on my Keffals live channel.
That's the microphone I want next, by the way. I think that's the Shure. That's what I'm getting.
Quick aside, if you're not already subscribed to that channel, you should absolutely check it out. While I upload pretty infrequently on this channel, I stream about 1 to 2 times a week on that channel and upload videos daily. A lot of work goes into the content over on that channel, and I promise you won't be disappointed. But to continue, I decided to cover the debate between Charlie Kirk and Benny on my stream a few days ago. Before the stream was even over, clips from the stream started to circulate on the part of Twitter where genocide denial is a commonplace thing, so long as the country doing it has a red flag. Many of these clips were dishonestly framed or included straight up lies, but I won't.
As a Canadian, that hits close to home in a weird way.
Won't get into debunking these clips right now. I'll likely go through them at a later date on stream. The day after I covered her, Benny addressed the situation on her Twitch stream. On that stream, she made dubious claims, such as saying that I am specifically targeting her because she is trans, despite the fact that none of my criticisms have anything to do with her gender identity.
Keffals, famous anti-trans woman activist. That's what she's known for, really.
More importantly, she gloated she was paid $3,000 by Turning Point USA.
I don't know if you can tell anything about Keffals' platform, but she absolutely hates women, just more than anything else.
The organization run by Charlie Kirk, to do that debate.
The funny thing is, though, Charlie Kirk paid me $3,000 to be at that
Why is Keffals lighting Benny up public like this? Well, we'll see.
Debate and laugh in his face. And I don't...
Let's hear this again, sorry.
She gloated she was paid $3,000 by Turning Point USA, the organization run by Charlie Kirk, to do that debate.
The funny thing is, though, Charlie Kirk paid me $3,000 to be at that debate and laugh in his face. And I don't think Keffals is getting paid $3,000 to watch it. I mean, maybe she is. So good on you if I guess that's what you're getting. But, like, at least I have an excuse,
Money? That's not an excuse. That's the thing that corrupts your ethical judgment, Benny. That's not an excuse. That's the accusation. You made your movement look bad for cash.
This is where things get interesting, because
Someone clipped that laugh.
Benny not only admitted to being paid opposition, but she admitted to accepting money from some very malicious sources in the process. You might be wondering, who exactly funds Turning Point USA?
I'm not going to say it. Let's keep going.
Their website points out that they're funded by organizations like the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank that spent $1 million on
I get where she's going with this. The money was acquired by really, really bad people who are doing really, really bad things to hurt trans people. And by the way, Heritage Foundation is not just targeting trans people. But it's not so much a matter of where the money comes from. It's a matter of what it's being purposed towards. Had Benny gone on and actually humiliated Charlie Kirk and taken thousands of their dollars, win-win. The problem is that Benny is an arrogant and ignorant person who I have to assume is not stupid enough to not recognize this, who threw her side under the bus, making them look stupid for the $3,000. You do have an obligation to perform well under these conditions. Under those conditions, it doesn't really matter where the money comes from. In fact, better if it comes from an evil organization like this, because that's money they have thrown into the sea. Because she did so terribly, that was money well spent. So she now becomes a part of their successful anti-leftist campaign, anti-trans campaign, whatever. That's the issue here. I don't think where the money comes from particularly matters, except to point to what end was that money purposed and why was Benny selected in particular for that role.
The LGBTQ Thanksgiving advertisements in order to oppose the Respect for Marriage Act.
For $3,000, I will debate President Sunday taking the pro position on nuclear war is good, actually. For $3,000, I will too against you. We will both argue to see who can argue the best for nuclear annihilation.
A legislative effort to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act and thus limiting the federal definition of marriage to between a man and a woman. But the money that Benny accepted didn't just come from the Heritage Foundation. If we take a closer look at Turning Point USA supporters, we'll also find groups like the Alliance for Defending Freedom, which the Southern Poverty Law Center has designated as an anti-LGBT hate group. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center website, the activities of the Alliance for Defending Freedom include supporting recriminalization of sexual acts between LGBTQ adults in the United States and criminalization abroad, defending state-sanctioned sterilization of trans people abroad, contending that LGBTQ people are more likely to engage in pedophilia, and claiming that a homosexual agenda will destroy Christianity and society.
Someday.
The Alliance for Defending Freedom has
Soon.
played a crucial role
Very soon.
in shaping the current political climate that the United States is in.
Even now, the
having
pieces are
donated
falling into place.
$85,000 to the Child and Parental Rights Campaign, which helped shape Florida's Don't Say Gay law. The ADF has even claimed responsibility for ending Roe v. Wade, ending the constitutional right for an abortion, and erasing decades of progress in the United States.
Putting them substantially behind the Soviet Union.
Alarmingly, it seems like Benny didn't even question why these heinous organizations would pay her for a debate in the first place. As I pointed out in my debate reaction.
Okay. Here's the problem with this line of argumentation. Keffals is 100% right, by the way. I agree with her. I just can't help but notice that you platformed Keemstar for 2 hours for free. Okay? And it was the exact same dynamic. There is a difference in that Keemstar was fooling her, arguably, sending out little signals. No, maybe I'm actually transpositive, and I can kind of buy that she was fooled. But it's like, this is why you got to be really careful, because that now gets turned against you really easily. I'm not going to. I think that what Benny did here is significantly worse and of a different kind. But it's like, you tread a little bit lightly here. You're not too far afield from doing that yourself.
She served as a useful patsy for the right to dunk on left-wing ideas in defense of their extreme positions. She was paid to make the right look good. I wish the situation ended with Benny just being clueless and accepting money from Charlie Kirk to, in her own words, sit and laugh at him for an hour. But instead, Benny decided to...
And once again, here's why I don't have a ton of sympathy for this. Because this, I'm going to spoil it a little bit. This is the friend she brought up, okay? This is the friend that's being lied about. And she probably is being lied about. Benny is not a smart or responsible person. That react spawned a barrage of clips on Twitter which resulted in Benny lying about me and I think you mean my friend, Brianna Wu, on her Twitch stream. These are my thoughts on the situation. Brianna Wu went onto Tim Pool very recently and thoroughly embarrassed herself. She had seemingly zero preparation. She spent an exorbitant amount of time relitigating. I don't like the thing was about Gamergate initially, but it's like she would make an accusation, have no information to back it up, pivot to something else, make another accusation, have no information to back it up, pivot to something else. They would dispute some kind of political issue going on. Tim Pool would sometimes outright lie. Brianna Wu would be so unprepared she would have no retort. She'd have to pivot and move on. And this went on for 3 hours. There are other currencies in the world besides money. There is, for example, attention. And if you're gaining attention at the expense of your movement, that's also bad. I don't think Keffals is going to say anything about this. If she does, I'll be pleasantly surprised. Power to her if she has that kind of integrity. But I haven't been impressed lately. And my expectation is that we're going to basically be attacking Benny justly for things which other people we are allowing a free pass. And I don't like it. That rubs me the wrong way.
to lie to her audience. She continued to spread dangerous misinformation in response to someone who was explaining why people were rightfully upset with her. In her defense of the camps in the Xinjiang region of province, she said, The Uyghur thing, according to the UN Human Rights Council, is normal prison things. This statement was not made out of ignorance. Benny knew of the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner report, and she lied to her followers about what the findings of that investigation was. While she told her followers it was just normal prison things, the report included multiple credible testimonies of women being interviewed saying that they were forcibly sterilized or given forced abortions. The report itself ends by saying that beyond a shadow of a doubt, there are serious human rights violations being committed in these camps in Xinjiang. These include threats not only to the prisoners in the camps, but their entire families as well. One of the interviewees said, "We had to sign a document to say that we would be silent about the camp. Otherwise, we would..."
I think even Bad Empanada had the right take on this one. Even he, I think, was chastising Hakim for doing genocide denial.
"Be kept for longer, and there would be punishment for the whole family." And Benny doesn't even touch on the reason that this report was written in the first place is because of the long-standing pattern of people going missing in the Xinjiang region and the families who were left in mourning trying to find them. The situation began to escalate after Benny began to fight with my friend Brianna Wu, who expressed her frustration with Benny, ignoring...
If your response to a thoughtful, well-sourced video critiquing the historical inaccuracy of your positions is subscribed to my nudes, it's hard for me to take you seriously.
The criticism of her harmful rhetoric and exploiting this tragedy in order to promote her OnlyFans. I have no problem with how people choose to make a living, but it is vile to use people's legitimate anger about genocide and accepting blood money from anti-LGBT hate groups in order to advertise your nudes. Benny's response to this was, if Keffals is going to be making...
And she's right. So here's the crucial point. Had she prepared and done a good job and wasn't being party to being an embarrassment for the sake of Charlie Kirk, Heritage Foundation, etc., for the sake of their goals of discrediting the left and discrediting LGBTQ plus advocates, etc., that would not be blood money. Had she prepared and actually given a good representation of her side, it wouldn't be blood money. It would be stolen money. It would be money that had been turned away from its bloody purpose to something else. As it is, she's now mutually profiting from that slandering of leftist activism. That's the issue here. And unfortunately, there's no way to salvage that. Keffals is just 100% correct here. I don't know why I say unfortunately. I'm not party to Benny at all. So Benny says, if Keffals is going to be making money off of me, what's the problem with me making money? Because Keffals is making money off you, you're making money off of the trans community getting eaten politically. That's the difference.
Money off me. What's the problem with me making money off her? At least what I'm doing is honest work. Following this, Brianna decided to confront Benny in her Twitch chat, as Benny had gone live on Twitch to cover the conflict between her and Brianna. I think it's likely Benny has since realized how badly she came off in that conflict, because she has since deleted the VOD of that stream. While Benny did address what happened on social media, she lied and said that she had never speculated on whether or not Brianna was trans. In reality, both of them honed in on this, mocking and belittling her, and even going as far as to say that she isn't welcome in the trans community. Benny uploaded a clip from that stream, although purposefully leaving the offending part out. You can immediately pick up on the tone in that stream and how much of a bully Benny was being, purposefully ignoring the fact that this entire situation came about because of her defense of genocide and authoritarian governments. It is incredibly unfortunate to me that Benny failed to engage in any of the criticisms that I had made of her. While I could point out that her positions were filtered through
Can't imagine what that feels like.
false representations of me via Twitter clips, I think it's important to say how much she even had to say before playing the clips.
Are we going to see
and how
the clips?
very little of what she said was...
We're not going to show us the clips? Okay. So here's one of my problems with this, and I have no truck with Benny. Benny's an imbecile, but here's the thing, okay? This is the clip in question.
Are you still here, Brianna? I'm curious.
I don't think she is.
Yeah, I think she might not be. But if you are, Brianna, I
I
don't
think
know.
she probably blushed because you were talking about her, and then she got really shy and had to leave.
Why don't you go back to Twitter and tell trans people how we need to pass better and appease cisgender folks more, because we're too complicated and difficult to understand, I guess. Why don't you go back to Twitter and do that, so that your miserable followers can
just a little
feel better about themselves, okay? For the love of God, mind your own goddamn
Why the
business.
fuck did that get blocked?
I have no idea.
Why is it?
I have no idea. I'm not gonna sit here and deliberate as to whether or not Brianna Wu is trans. That's really irrelevant to the.
She's responding to a comment. She's asking, why was this comment blocked? She's responding to it. Somebody in her chat was speculating about whether Brianna was trans. She said it's irrelevant. That's not speculating whether Brianna is trans. That's unfair.
To the moment, isn't it? Right?
She might be. There's terrible trans people out there.
Yeah, there's
I've met a lot of. Fucking trans people.
She's not speculating if Brianna is trans. She's saying, don't know, don't care, it's not relevant. She could be. She's a bad person, and even trans people can be bad. That is not speculating if Brianna Wu is trans. Speculating if Brianna Wu is trans, like the whole transvestigation shit show, that would be a thing that Slimeball's doesn't matter. Point is, that's not what they're doing. That's not what they're doing.
People are not a monolith, right?
Don't do it, Sunday? Don't do what? She might be, says the person sitting next to her. Yeah, she does. The person sitting next to her does. It doesn't matter. It's a bad sounding sentence, but it's not. That's not speculating whether she's trans.
I know you weren't claiming this, but it just fucking.
Don't show us a speculation. No. I'm not showing you what speculation would look like. What I'm saying is, there is no speculation. It's actually kind of the opposite. They're rebuffing speculation.
Oh my god, we're different people. Holy shit, trans people disagree with each other all the time. It's very fundamentally in very important ways.
I don't play the game of speculating as to whether or not someone is trans. Brianna Wu's words on Twitter speak for themselves. And, at a bare minimum, she is unhelpful, at best, to the trans people.
I don't care if...
I actually agree with this. We're going to get into this why in a moment. But here's the part where Benny loses me pretty categorically.
she's trans or not, she's still not welcome in the trans community.
That's stupid. I don't know if she's trans or not, but she's still not welcome in the trans community. If you are trans, you are part of the community by definition, because the community is not an exclusionary club. It's a demographic. Community we use as a shorthand. There's not actually a secret organization of trans people. You have to show your card and everything.
Yeah.
She's not allowed to be a part of the community either way.
Yeah.
Either way, she's not in the trans community, so to speak.
I don't know what the hell they're saying here, but it's really stupid. Anyways, point is, this is unfair. They were not speculating as to whether or not Econoboi was trans.
Was even a response to the content of my videos. It is very important to left-wing politics to engage in good faith with people on our own side when we disagree with them. I know many in my audience will say that Benny is no longer a leftist, given her defense of authoritarian
No, Benny is a leftist. She's an idiot, though. Here's the thing, there's two senses of leftism. There's leftism in the sense that you are sort of a part of the bipolar culture of American politics. And you fall on the anti-right side. That's sort of superficial leftism. We'll get into that too in a second. It's going to matter very shortly. Oddly enough, when I'm talking about Econoboi. Actual leftism is an actual critical attitude towards institutions, traditions, that centers the improvement of the human situation over the protection of these other things that are tertiary to the human condition. Does that make sense? Like, it is a leftist stance to be willing to criticize your mode of government or your economic system or your gender norms, etc., to the end of improving the lot for humanity. It is a very right-wing thing to defend these against that for their own sake.
Genocidal regimes such as China and the DPRK, and I sympathize with that sentiment. But I want to point out what I said at the beginning of this video. When Benny left TYT, I took her criticism seriously. Benny is still very much a progressive, and on most issues, I'm still in agreement with her. I prominently featured her rebuttal to Cenk concerning trans healthcare and how it relates to the topic of trans women in sports. I think she had great things to say on that topic and stand by the value of her words there, which is why I included it in my video. We should be able to have disagreements on the left without resorting to outright toxicity.
I would be so sympathetic to this if it wasn't for my direct experience with Keffals, etc. Because that's fundamentally not what Keffals, etc. are about. You try disagreeing with these people on anything robust. You try disagreeing with these people on something superficial. And you will be torched. However, they will turn a blind eye to people with money and influence who are actively attacking members of the community. We're going to look at this in a moment. This is grossly hypocritical on Keffal's part. I would change my tune so fast if she started applying this standard to herself and to the people she associates with. I don't have faith that's going to happen, though.
Benny making statements towards Brianna, such as her not being welcome in the trans community, are the exact type of unhelpful responses that should be discouraged in left-wing conversation. I do not want my viewers to come away from this video thinking that I'm encouraging people to attack Benny for her positions. What I would like is that we all do our best to participate in healthy dialogue. Sometimes that will mean heavily disagreeing with other content creators. This is simply part of being in a political space.
This is why I'm saying this is a dangerous position for Keffals to take, okay? This is a very dangerous position for Keffals to take. Keffals has not historically been willing to accept criticism. She has not historically or recently been willing to see eye to eye with people who have issues with how she manages her platform or with who she associates with. She has pretty viciously mocked people for that, as a matter of fact. A little bit more disturbingly, I learned this firsthand. There has been a tendency to try and disappear people from the network of leftist creators and leftist figures in these spaces if they don't like each other. I made a comment to Vosh one stream. It was like, he was complaining about his, it seems so petty, and it is. I made a comment to Vosh one stream because he was complaining about people mocking his media takes. And I was like, there's a general tendency for your Reddit to be taken over by people on the outside of your community who are hostile to it. I don't think it's even actually majority populated by your community anymore. It might make sense to buff up the moderation a little bit. Like, take a look at it and see, you can shuffle things around to make it work for you as opposed to against you. And as Mod Any jumps in and starts insulting me, telling me, the Reddit is impeccably run, your opinion is discarded. I'm not even talking to him. We have a back and forth on Discord. I eventually tell him, look, I don't care about you, okay? Maybe you run the Reddit, maybe you run a bunch of stuff. I don't care. I was talking to Vosh, who owns the Reddit. Just, know your place kind of thing. And after declaring that he's a million times more than a Reddit mod and that his opinion is important, be careful, I then received a message from somebody else telling me that, this guy is intending to go around and sort of neuter your reach. And so I had a conversation with Keffals on stream a couple days before. My name and face suddenly disappear from the thumbnail. I am suddenly, like, a whole bunch of, like, weird little things start happening. And it's like, okay, I can't raid into other channels anymore. And it's like, all right, this is a little bit weird. I messaged Keffals, hey, just want to check to see, like, we're all good, right? Just, like, got a little weird with any, da-da-da. Just want to, check in. No response. Eventually, after I respond to the anything after a few days on Twitter, she comes in and says, I was made very uncomfortable by your criticisms of Brianna Wu. That's why I didn't respond to you. Those are all deleted now. We are not in a space, we are not in a place right now, vis-a-vis Keffals, where Keffals is able to say, I want open dialogue even if it's uncomfortable. Because this is open dialogue even if it's uncomfortable. This is what Brianna Wu is doing, okay? We're gonna close this now. We're gonna bring up this. This is what Brianna Wu is about. And I'll explain why this is a problem as we go. Okay? This is Brianna Wu's Mastodon. I can't see her on Twitter. But she wrote this up. I have a copy of it if she blocks me while the stream is going. She wrote this very, very silly set of posts that encapsulates her political recommendations for the online left. I'm going to explain why they're very, very bad. Okay? And this is amidst her making frequent comments to the effect that non-binary people, nobody really cares about them. Anybody who's basically not a trans man or a trans woman, they're too weird to be for advocacy for them to be politically viable. And so she's said this in response, because people have been criticizing her for this increasingly. Not as many as should, because everybody's been turning a blind eye to her. But here it is. 1. There's a huge schism on the left I've struggled to understand, and I think I figured out how to put words to it. Please tell me if this rings true to you. There are policy leftists, and there are infinite leftists. I am a policy leftist. There are specific policies I want with a beginning and end. That language is important. I can argue them from a rational basis without calling you names if you disagree. I mean, funny in my experience, but we'll leave that for now. Single-payer healthcare, lowering housing costs, civil rights for LGBT people. No Q+. It brings me into conflict with infinite leftists. They see all these issues in terms of a purity test that spirals into infinity. It is intriguing that she's applying a negative label to people who don't abide by her standards while criticizing those people of engaging in a purity test. You start with one issue and you write it for leftwards. If you ever stop, you are a moral monster. No, if you stop, you're not a leftist, because as soon as you start protecting a state of affairs, that's a conservative act. That's not left-wing. Single-payer healthcare should be universal healthcare. Actually, that's capitalism, so nationalize it. Actually, medical establishment discriminates against trans people, so informed consent for all medication. Actually, why take hormones? At all, gender itself... What is it? Does this extend? After all, gender itself... Okay. I don't know what that is. That's weird. Infinity, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so ... It's not that those policy goals... are the problem. It's that all these arguments are so moralistic, policy leftists like myself can't ever have a moment to go, hold on, how are we going to do that? If you do, you get screamed at by your own side. Infinite leftism works well online. I myself was caught up in it for much of the Gamergate era. But when it comes to actually getting policy passed, it's cancer. It trains people to expect utopia with none of the compromises needed in a democracy. Infinite leftism does incredible damage, particularly to the marginalized people it's supposedly trying to speak for, because the people most hurt by the system are held to the highest infinite standards of purity. This shit show with infinite leftism is like coronavirus. Everyone catches it eventually, and I think a lot of people like me, I suppose, have had it often enough to be immune to it. It's why infinite leftism is so much weaker than it used to be. If there's any future for progressives taking over the party from corporate Democrats, it's going to come from policy leftists who have a narrowly defined set of objectives. That's a base requirement to build the coalitions needed in a democracy. The infinite leftists will scream. They'll call us names. They'll puff their chests and insist their way is the only way to win. I think most people are frankly tired of their bullshit. Our reasoning and strategy are better than theirs. Better than theirs. narrowly defined set of objectives. Let me show you what her narrowly defined set of objectives look like. These are Brianna Wu's narrowly defined set of objectives. Okay? This is not the only place where this has occurred, but it's one of them. Every second, this is in a conversation about non-binary identities, and Doe was brought up, as a matter of fact. Very great friend of the channel. Every second, the discussion about transgender people is about anything but civil rights in the form of public policy. Is a second the conversation is not serving the community's needs, which are serious and important. Insomnior replies, actually recognizing them as valid people, including recognizing their identity, is important. And she replies, I don't know a single trans person that feels this discourse, which is overwhelmingly led by cis people, is actually helping the community. Other people can confirm that she's been going around making this argument in myriad different places. Here's the problem with Brianna Wu's infinite leftism, okay? I'm going to outline it for you. This is the problem with this strategy of arbitrarily deciding on the basis of guesswork, ultimately, that you're just too weird to be advocated for. 1. Abandoning advocacy for some subsets of the trans community on the grounds that they, based on sheer guesswork, are too alien or uncomfortable for the average voter to sympathize with will set a precedent for carving off parts of the community for the sake of popular appeal. Leaving aside that if we adopted this sort of thinking, we wouldn't even have gay rights by this point. 2. This will result in fractures within the trans community as advocacy for certain subsets is deemed politically non-viable, and anyone with an identity outside of trans man, trans woman, possibly with medicalist conditions defining each to make them less weird and more palatable, will no longer have their interests represented by the whole. 3. These groups will then have their respective interests formally opposed to each other. The interest of the whole is now opposed to the interest of the part who is being abandoned for the viability of this grander strategy, supposedly. We'll see why this actually works against the whole in the end anyways. However, given the populist nature of the plan, of the strategy, the group with the more members wins, and so the more and more specific your identity is, the further and further away from representation you are. In fact, you are increasingly treated as a liability for the movement as a whole, and this will create friction within the trans community itself. 4. These non-viable groups will then cease to be represented in the community and will be massively demoralized. Eventually, many of these non-viable persons will disengage, resulting in an overall shrinking of the size, density, and diversity of the trans community as it becomes more exclusionary. 5. This will have no effect on the economic security of large media representatives of the trans community. However, the shrinking of that community will result in growth stagnation. The audiences of major trans representatives or pro-trans representatives in the media, they won't lose their audiences. Their audiences won't move on to other channels. They're desperate for representation, but the audiences won't grow. Which leads to 6. This will create serious financial incentive for trans representatives to curate their content to appeal to other audiences in order to grow. We've seen this across the board. We've seen this on the Young Turks very strongly, with whom Brianna Wu has a very strong relationship. We've seen this with Keffals a little bit. We've seen this with everybody so far. It seems to be more or less ubiquitous. And 7, if they are successful in gaining another audience, something a little bit weird happens. The trans audience won't get more representation in the spaces of these new audiences. Instead, they will begin to shrink in the audiences of the representatives to a minority status in the audiences of these media figures. And eventually, if they become unpopular enough, which is very likely given the fact that they aren't being normalized, they're actually being sidelined for the sake of a populist message, eventually they may be disavowed altogether. We've already seen this happen with non-binary people. We've seen this with specific categories of non-binary people extensively. We haven't even really achieved equal representation for a lot of them so far at all. And yet already. So, it's not good. And I guess the wonder is, why would Wu advocate for such a counterproductive plan? There's 2 reasons. The first is that despite recounting her extensive political experience in almost every encounter Wu has, as if she's in a never-ending job interview, Brianna Wu has almost no political experience to speak of. Her experience in politics begins with volunteer canvassing for a segregationist, Trent Lott. And a congressional run whose failure Wu attributes to the fact that, quote, she did not put in nearly the amount of work into this that I should have, unquote. In short, in the one serious political campaign in which Wu took part as a critical member, she failed because she was lazy. Interestingly, in the video ad for her congressional run, she talks about how inequality and racism in her hometown is what motivated her to get into politics in the first place. She doesn't mention that how she got into politics was campaigning for a segregationist. Like, the only reason why we're talking about Wu today is because she was able to self-insert as a main character in Gamergate. She was able to get money for a very, very bad game. She was able to use her status as a game developer to pretend to be like some major pusher and mover in that whole thing. She got hooked up with Cenk Uygur as a result, and she was able to co-found the Rebellion PAC, which moves around money to fund ad campaigns. Go figure, a little bit funny in light of what I've just mentioned. So that's the extent of Wu's political experience. She has no sense for strategy, no actual background in political organizing as such, and so when she cites her political experience as a reason to take her seriously when she advocates for making strategic moves at the expense of large parts of the trans community, she does so apropos of no political experience whatsoever. Because Brianna Wu doesn't have experience in politics, Brianna Wu has experience in having money. You're allowed to fail when you have money. When you have lots of money and you're able to give people money, people will let you fail and they'll come back to you because they also want your money. The second reason is because she doesn't care about your well-being. She's not invested in the trans community winning any of this. Brianna Wu, was it earlier this year? Brianna Wu very recently was going on Twitter talking about how Hogwarts Legacy is not a game. It's a test of character and many people are failing it. She then went on to buddy up with somebody who defended Kiwi Farms, was considering donating to Kiwi Farms, did donate to Cough City just to mock FD Signifier. Probably the most egregious thing he's done in his life. Talking about Destiny, of course. She's sent money in the way of right-wing and other channels that do not promote a left-wing message. In particular, she's been going out of her way to talk about how certain fairly prolific transphobic actors are actually really nice people and really reasonable, and she hopes more conservatives are like them. I'm talking about counterpoints. Which tells you something. It tells you two things. First of all, as a strategist, if she is a decent strategist, and I think there's an argument for her being one in a very limited sense, it's not for you. What she is good at strategizing for is positioning herself to benefit from exposure personally. She doesn't want the trans movement to win. She doesn't want trans rights to be escalated, although sure she does at some abstract level. At the end of the day, what she actually values is being rich and famous. Mostly famous because she's already rich. Which is why she's already set up an escape hatch. She's all buddy-buddy with Destiny and Counterpoints and all these people. She doesn't need you. She doesn't need you. If you disagree with her, if you don't like what she's doing, if you become untenable to her, she'll switch over there. But you can't do that. You don't have the kind of money to get these people to vouch for you in particular. You're just kind of screwed. And it's like there's nobody is taking her to task for this. And nobody's taking any of the people who are buddying up with her to task for this. Like, these are members of the trans community that she is advocating are thrown under the bus on the basis of nothing, as part of a plan that will actually destroy it, because the only people who benefit from this are the people who want the trans community to moderate its message so it doesn't extend any further, so it's weaker. And moreover, if she actually cared about this, she wouldn't be centering herself in the same way as Benny did on Charlie Kirk. Her outing on Tim Pool was embarrassing. She has a history of lying about her degrees. She has a history of making up harassment campaigns against herself. Her background is embarrassing. She's not playing the role of a strategist. She's playing the role of a socialite. See, here's what Brianna could do if she wanted to be responsible and actually a positive influence. She could silently, very quietly, very carefully, give money to trans creators or to progressive creators who have a good message but don't have the ability or the time to make it reach out. She gave Wick something to the tune of $1,000 to run a debate with Vosh and some Catholic guy. Vosh could have very well lost that debate if the Catholic guy was intelligent. Vosh doesn't win every debate he has. He's almost universally right against people like that, but that doesn't mean he does a good job. More to the point, this is entirely in Wick's economic interest already. He would have done this for free. $500, though, could have freed up some trans creator to do nothing but like really strong progressive content for a month. It's absurd. And I'm noticing something very disturbing. There is a weird tendency of people in that orbit, Vosh excluded. I think he's been hands-off. Credit to him, frankly. I hope he remains that way. But there's been a weird tendency of people in that sphere to just let everything slide if some famous figurehead is doing it. Brianna Wu is whitewashing transphobes and people who have actively facilitated and abetted and defended the harassing of Keffals and other people in her community, including former mods, current mods, etc., etc. Someone like Rose Rist gets thrown out for helping him edit a document. Brianna Wu goes on and defends him and says he's a wonderful person, amidst him sending... How much money did he send to Cop City? Like... And she's her friend? This is insane. This is insane. You have people who are actively working against your interests and advocating for plans that will destroy us. And she's not getting any pushback because she's a rich, famous person. This is not good. So, because here's the deal. This is what will happen if you follow Brianna Wu's advice. Brianna Wu will have a short spot in the limelight. She's a very ignorant person, and a very lazy person, and a very opportunistic person, so it will not last. Because she can't compete intellectually with most people. This is why Tim Pool, of all people, was able to give her the runaround for 3 hours. But she will get into a position where she is able to embarrass you. She will embarrass you mightily. She will either disown you or will be disowned. Afterwards, you will be the worse for it politically. You will be saddled with the spectacle of having a bunch of cynical money grubbers running the show, and you will be no better off for it. And in fact, you'll be worse off for it because now the trans community, if it's abided by her logic, has fractured. Because now you've created essentially class divisions within the trans community. You're non-binary or you're too weird. Yeah, you just shut up, okay? You're not. We can't get leftism. We can't get progressive policies put into place if you exist. So just be quiet. They're not gonna like sit in for that. All that's going to happen is Vosh and Destiny are going to canvass. Everything else is going to go on as normal, but you will have radically demoralized and broken trans advocacy on this platform. That's it. So Brianna Wu is not your friend. Keffals. You too. She's not your friend. Brianna Wu is a business opportunity, and she's one that you are taking on with extraordinary disregard for what she's actually doing to your community. So I hope she smartens up. Frankly, for me, if Brianna Wu smartened up and just stopped doing the the purity testing she herself is engaging in, I wouldn't care. If she wants to throw money around at people, I do not care ultimately. But when she's now using the position she has essentially bought her way into to start advocating for abandoning large parts of the trans community, that's sick. That's actually sick. And to go along with that is disgraceful. So if you're going to go after someone like Benny And justly so, by the way. Benny's an idiot. And a selfish idiot at that. And what she's doing is destructive. If you're going to go after her, you got to look inwards too. Because that's way worse. That is way worse. Anyone who's letting this slide, that you cannot let this slide. Because it will not win, and you won't be forgiven when it doesn't, because things are going to get really bad potentially. Really bad. There is actually no guarantee that in the long run, we win at all. It took thousands of years to get the legalization of gay marriage in this country. The logic that Brianna Wu is peddling, and the people who are defending her are de facto signing off on, is one which would have prevented us from even getting here now. And we can go back. That's a thing that can happen. We've had progressive societies that have reverted radically. It's happened before. It's happened recently, just the past 100 years. So, yeah. We can't afford to let rich socialites co-opt our representation, because we will die. We will not survive that. We need to start having standards, and we need to start holding ourselves to them. Thank you, Win. Dear God, for the 20 gifted memberships. It's very appreciated. Thank you. All right, Braveheart speech over. I'm going to go to the washroom, and then we have to talk to Beckett of Crabs about the Jack thing. So, be right back. Cheerio. All right, we're back. Oh, I didn't play any music while I was gone. Sorry about that. Okay. VTuber PS Win? I'm already a VTuber. Notice how I have hair again? Where do you think that came from? Guys, no ableist language, okay? We do have standards here. Thank you, BC, for the $5 Stay Winning Sunday. Well, we'll see. Historically, when I do these things, it doesn't go well for me, but that's fine. There are levels of survival I am prepared to accept. Okay. We are talking to, here, we should open up our virtual camera. We are talking to Beckett of Crabs about the Jack thing, so this is gonna probably suck, honestly, but we'll see. Okay, here we go. Hold on to your butts.
Guten Tag.
Hold on, give me 1 sec. You're very quiet. Why are you so quiet?
I apologize. Right, give me a sec. Let me get you.
As well you should. Disgraceful.
Oh, fucking hell. We've been watching the Keffals debate.
Oh, yeah? The Keffals debate. There's a debate?
Well, not the debate. Her coverage.
Oh, you mean the video today?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just finished that. I don't know if that's just me, but you're stupendously quiet. Jack, can you, here, try speaking again?
Test 1 2 1 2.
Testing. Okay. I think we'll boost.
Is that any better? Does that sound any better?
It sounds a little better. I think I'll just try to boost you as much as possible. We'll see if that works.
Okay. So.
Can't wait to see Sunday talk to Vosh about Woo. I'm not talking to Vosh about Woo. Oh, Tony. Tony. Anyways,
give me 1 second. On screen. There we go. Oh, technical joys today. Is my camera all right? Am I coming through okay?
Camera seems to be fine.
Lovely. Good evening. How are you?
Oh, I am exhausted, but I'm doing all right. What did you think of the Keffals video? We just finished it.
I think it's a fucking massacre. I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, look,
I generally agree.
I get annoyed at a couple of things. I think one of the big ones is I'm only about 27 minutes into it. I think some of Keffel's points are equally dumb. I have a bugbear. I think when people say things like there's never been a true communist system, for example, I just think those are really dumb arguments.
What do you think so?
On the other side. Because as somebody who's like read Smith, there's never been a true capitalist system either. Like by the philosophical standard, there's never been an actual capitalist system.
No, I mean,
never say that because
sure.
we understand what a capitalist system looks like in reality, as opposed to the philosophical idea of it, right?
I'll take your word for that. I think one of the reasons why I would not, for example, use China or the USSR as examples of the possibility of socialism is primarily because the particular forms that those states took was the consequence of actually like compromises and specifications of Marxist theory, sometimes not even Marxist at all, in order to achieve these. So, for example, one of the massive debates between socialist thinkers leading up to the revolution in Russia was between, not leading up to, but between socialist revolutionaries in the last century was between Lenin and Luxemburg. And one of the things that Luxemburg critiqued Lenin for was his, I'm butchering this because I'm giving like the really rough version, but Lenin had a fear of corruption of the party goal, of the aims of socialism on the part of the vanguard from the lower downs. And so he was very, very big on having a professional political class, the vanguard itself, have a strict top-down relationship with the people below them. Luxemburg was critical of this because she discerned that this would really undercut the intellectual and industrial whatever creativity of the working class broadly. And so all you would end up doing is having a permanent entrenchment of all the worst elements of any sort of state structure, where you have bureaucrats acting as essentially like priests and executioners and nobody else having a say and having like general intellectual stagnation as a result because there's no outside voices or diversity inside the thing. However, that logic gave Lenin a massive survival advantage in terms of taking power in a state structure in a society already under revolution. And so there are reasons why that one has more survival value in the case of revolution itself, but it never caused a revolution and it never carried one through to socialism itself. It always only took over a state and was in an intermediate period. Yeah.
This is part of the problem. Like I don't know, with general philosophical social theories, you can have really good principles and perfect ideas, but like the thing that seems to be always left out is the human element. This happens in economics, in classical economics, like often.
Oh, that's precisely Luxemburg's point. I agree with you.
So,
I think, yeah, but I think one of the major flaws of the parties that took over was precisely that they overdetermined the ends and how they were going to do it. There's more to it than that, of course, but the reason why I would think it's not fair to say socialism is non-viable as a consequence of these examples is precisely because they aren't representative of a general line of thinking. They're representative of specific groups, lines of thinking that are highly particularized.
But I'd also say that we'd still say that while they may not be like perfect because of like whatever factors occur.
Well, it's not a matter of them being perfect, it's that they literally just aren't that. They're a strategy to attain that, but they're a bad strategy. Or they're a strategy that may be good in some time, but bad in this one.
But would you agree then that that's always at some point going to be the case with any system because no system exists in the vacuum? Therefore, like the argument of we've never had a true communist or a true socialist system is still a poor argument on its surface when you're trying to defend these things. Because if you want to
let's specify this. What are we trying to defend?
Well, if you're saying like, okay, well, you can dismiss, say, the USSR or Cuba or China and say that they're not true communist systems, therefore communism's never been tried, therefore any criticism of those systems isn't really a criticism of communism.
Oh no, just by dint of them being more specific than simply advocacy for a socialist system or for socialist politics or even for communism, by dint of them being more particular than that, to use as an example dismantling or refuting the viability of the whole. I mean, that's fallacious on its face. Maybe they are all impossible. That's a possibility, but I don't think that that's a reasonable inference.
I think all philosophical, and even religious. We'll come to religion because we'll talk about Jake.
Yes.
But this is, I said this is true of like Christianity. You can make the same argument. There's never been a true Christian scriptural-based church. Well, at least not for the past like 1700 years.
Yeah, people have made that argument actually. G.K. Chesterton had a famous line. It's like the Christian what is it? Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and never tried. That's distinctly.
But again, like I think those are arguments that sound good in a vacuum, but I don't think they're.
Well, what are the arguments? Arguments that are purpose to establishing some kind of thesis, right? So what thesis is there has never been true Christianity trying to establish? See, for me, it would be, this is a very strong case for the hypocrisy of Christian churches claiming that they represent Christianity. On the flip side of this is what Christian churches try to do, as opposed to a lot of people who defend the USSR or China as not representing them. Some of them instead take the opposite tack. People like Benny do, where they say, no, actually they've achieved full socialism. They're better than the United States in terms of how they treat poor people and so on. I think that if you're judging the viability of a plan, you should be judging the plan on its own merits and not on bloke over here changed the plan and then deployed it in a very specific context. It didn't work out, therefore the plan doesn't work. It doesn't necessarily follow. It doesn't follow logically at all. Now, it could still be the case, but the argument that socialism is bunk or is non-viable on the basis of these examples, that's spurious. I have no investment whatsoever in defending any of these things. So,
yeah, no, I think it's just, I don't know. It's I hate to say it, it's very debate broy. To me, and I'm not against debate browiness. I just think that I understand why people get frustrated and annoyed when those things are thrown at them. And I think there's a couple more examples from like when Keffals is talking about, Benny could have pointed at the great socialist leaders, like people who argued for an 8-hour work day, and I'm like, yes, but these are quite generalized examples, and it's almost like, well, Henry Ford argued for a 5-day working week. Does that make Henry Ford a socialist?
No, that's not great.
So,
it's not a great argument.
you know,
I don't think I got to that point. I think that's later on in the video. I think we cut it off at about the 3/4 mark. But
Yeah,
that's not a great argument either. I think the correct attitude is to be pretty open-minded, and I mean open-minded to the point of maybe not even advocating for communism at all. Like, it's distinctly possible that there is an element of non-viability to it. I would just remain open to it. There may be paths forward we can't predict.
I'm saying, man, like anarcho-monarchism is the only true workable system.
Now you're talking. All right, we weren't here to talk about tanky stuff. What are we talking about?
So I want to talk to you about Jake. You know, I had a debate with Jake.
Somebody informed me in chat. What was that about again?
It was about incels, and it was just basically him telling me that it was all down to patriarchy for 6 hours.
It
was pretty bad.
There's a okay. It depends. Look. To give credit, there's. I can kind of see how you would do that, but you'd have to explain it. It wouldn't do to just say patriarchy as a buzzword. Especially if you're talking to someone.
It was basically patriarchy as a buzzword.
Okay, that's not great.
It's things like,
yeah.
so for instance, he took umbrage with the fact that, like, so I actually came into a Discord, I think it was the day after, and was talking about some of this with some of your community.
Okay.
So I want to be like clear for people who've seen that. I want to be clear on a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I push back on a lot of narratives is it's because it's my personal opinion from reading quite a bit of history that women's roles through history have been.
By the way, I want to judge your bookshelf after the call.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Technically, it's mostly my mum's, and I just inherited it. But, yeah, it's like a lot of women's work and contribution has basically been wiped from history. And some of the things that are said by the feminist side basically almost lean into, in my opinion, fairly far-right memes about how women never had agency before they basically got liberation. And when you look back in history, women, like, so for instance, one of the things that came up is like, well, women weren't allowed to own businesses. It's like, well, actually, right through the like 15 to 17, like late 1700s, early 1800s.
No, there have been,
UK,
you can draw on
women
counter examples. I think one that immediately
Yeah.
comes up in the context of the religion conversation is that Muhammad married upwards to a woman business owner, if memory serves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's those kind of things.
She
that
may have
seem to
inherited it from her
washed out.
dead husband, but I don't know the details exactly. But I remember that
Yeah,
being a part. Yeah.
you get all those kind of things, and then I don't know. There were a couple of quite frustrating things in that conversation because I like dispelling certain myths.
Are you
but
busy tonight?
also
What have you got next?
Nothing.
You want to
I'm
review it
sorry.
together? Let's do that.
What? Which
The
one?
debate. Let's go over it.
What? Mine with Jake?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Let's do it.
do
Okay, cool.
If it's still up, if someone finds it.
Let's see. I'm sure he's got it up. Let's see. Beckett versus actual Jake. If we can't
You
find
can't
it.
find
Oh,
it.
Patriarchy. Here we go. Actual Jake. Yeah, we got it. Sweet.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Aha.
There we go. Share your screen to me. That's fucking
I will.
amazing.
Give me a
Yeah.
sec.
Okay.
Okay. Here, let me.
Before we start, I do. His indigenous takes are fucking wild. You know that's the argument that if anything is introduced and it's not from the original culture, therefore it's like oppressive. That's the equivalent of saying that all high heels, any woman who wears high heels is basically being oppressed by like the Hun nations because that's where they originally come from, horseback archers. I don't understand what the
Really?
fuck he's talking about with this Christian thing. Well, yeah, because the argument of, well, Christianity is not an indigenous religion. Well, nothing's really indigenous. Most things have appeared over time, right? Like,
Yeah.
like cultural crossover. Very few things do. In fact, all Christianity is like basically being thrust upon Europe by the Roman.
Oh, your audio is
Empire.
muffling a little bit there.
You want me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah. But everything's like Christianity was spread through the Roman Empire.
God, you're still
I mean,
muffled. What's going on here? Can you?
it's not me.
Oh, there you go. You're better now.
Fuck! I swear you're fucking with me.
I'm not.
You're
Like
fucking
it sounded like you were in a toilet for a second. Okay, so this is. Oh God, was this really 4 hours long?
Yeah. It's.
Okay, we're not going to watch the whole thing. Are there
You don't need to.
timestamps?
I mean, increasingly, it just becomes him saying
loops, okay.
patriarchy
All
to
right.
me over and over again.
Let me know if you can't hear this, and we'll go through a little bit of it. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I actually have never watched a full actual jig debate. So this is an experience for me.
I do, yes.
Okay,
I
wait,
do.
what the fuck?
Give me 1 second.
There
Let
it
me
goes.
give you
Yeah, I have
a
the camera
camera.
Sure.
My tech skills have not got any better, apparently.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. How are you doing?
Good. How are
How's
you?
things? I'm good. I'm good. I've had a fun night. I've mostly been explaining to Katana Bros why they are wrong about medieval armor. That's been
Katana?
a big part of tonight.
Like-
Katana Bros.
is that a group of folks?
They were just like they were convinced. They were convinced that they were like, nah, medieval armor could, like, a knight could never take a samurai. They'd completely destroy them. It'd be so easy for them. And I was like, guys, what the fuck are you actually talking about? So
Knights had
been,
guns.
I feel I came into
they were
this with
talking
like
about,
really good
Crusader
faith.
period.
Oh.
Sorry, you saying again?
I feel like I came into this like
dear God,
really
you're, like,
good faith.
blasting now. Why are you, all of a sudden you're so loud. Okay, let me put you down to normal. All right.
Do you want to do this in a channel? Can we do this in a channel? Because maybe it's the direct call.
You think so? Why would that matter?
I don't know.
It's the
Discord's
same,
weird like
it's the
that.
same
Sometimes.
servers, isn't it? It seems fine for me.
I-
We can keep on here if it's alright.
Okay. But yeah, I feel like I was really good faith coming into this.
No, I think I had the volume way down earlier, so I was artificially boosting it in OBS because I'm dumb.
But at the same time, I'm like, listen, plate mail armor versus a katana is not going to go well for the katana. And also samurai
Here,
armor
we're
is
gonna jump ahead because I'm bored by this already.
Yeah.
Like we
Yeah.
derive as men a lot of
Here we
value
go.
based on.
Here we go.
I think the fundamental thing is when we're talking about male loneliness and how men deal with it, there is a wider problem there of basically men feeling like they have no purpose, no community, no space, which is why people like Andrew Tate are able to appeal to them.
Yeah, but that's due to misogyny and toxic masculinity and the patriarchal structure intersecting with how men value themselves. Like we derive as men a lot of value based on our the ability to have women around, the ability to make money, stuff like that. Like it's patriarchy intersecting with capitalism usually, and that's non-gendered because like women face the same exact type of loneliness, but from their side of experience.
That would be gendered, but it affects both genders. Would be the argument.
It's a patriarchy. Does that make sense?
Or it affects all genders. Or
It makes sense. I disagree with you on a couple of things. So I talk quite a lot about. I probably have a bit more of a nuanced view on things like patriarchy. I tend to go down to class and kind of like the differences there because I'm quite.
Well,
I am quite big on history.
Yeah.
Sure, but
They don't-
I'm
they're
also
not the
quite big
same.
on things like history and like particularly pre-1800s, for example. Most people don't know that in Britain pre-1800s women could vote.
Mhm.
Like is a really like simple example of where women's power actually lay within like the class system. Becomes more complex. But with the question of like how we deal with male loneliness, I don't think it's a thing that like men can just fix or something that we can kind of dismiss as general loneliness, because I think there's a wider thing there of men feeling like they don't belong. I don't think relationships fix those problems. I think that's a red herring, and that's
where could women vote prior to 1800?
UK. Voting was based on land membership, so about 2% of the voting population were women. They were just matriarchal households
I see.
in the aristocracy.
I'm just on what
I got fact-checked on this, by the way, by Fairy Queen on a WIC panel. But yeah, it's records, yeah.
Did she dispute or okay? So let's see. So we have
No, she literally went and fact-checked it and was like, "Oh shit, you're right." Yeah, and most people don't know this shit. This is why I get really fucking frustrated. But yeah, it's not a huge proportion, but it wasn't gendered. It was classed because Britain is a
well, I
class-based
mean,
society.
here would be my next question though, and I'm not up to speed on this. Did primogeniture apply in inheritance of land to women, or did sons have dibs? Because if something like that happened, then you're in a bit of a weird territory where, yeah, technically women who own property could vote, but if you were a woman with a brother and you got property via inheritance, you would not actually get that property. Your brother would get it instead, so you wouldn't be able to vote that way.
Depends on the time period. But yeah, okay. So generally, like a son's inherited, that is true, or you married in. But so, for instance, if a woman was widowed, then her son doesn't automatically inherit things. So women who like held on to the matriarchal power before passing things
Sure.
on.
So you would
either
have
because of, like,
priority if you were the parent, but you wouldn't necessarily if you were the child.
yeah. So again, ties into family structures, not disputing that, does tie into marriage structures, but at the same time, this is part of the reason why we ended up with like Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, because they were still able to inherit power rather than the like
No.
lines splitting up.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. I think my immediate issue would be I'm not going to find this very compelling to say that you're not in a patriarchal situation, therefore, and that's not sort of like overwhelmingly influential. We'll see how he goes about this, but yeah.
Yeah, so just to preamble this, my frustration with this was my frustration with the patriarchal argument generally, especially like I don't deny that patriarchy exists at all, but it seems to get okay, what's a good way to put this? It seems to get used as a thing of removing any women's agency from history or any of the like societal structural choices that were made.
So you're right. So even in legal representation, there were instances where women had like political legal agency, sure. But I mean, if these are like the slim exception as opposed to not even a general rule, but even like a reliable occurrence, that doesn't seem like a very compelling argument against that.
Sure,
I think
but in a feudal system, because the power structures are like all coming down. So I mean, we could get really into this.
Well, we don't need to. Just very quickly.
Probably think it would be a better conversation than what this turns into. I think what I wanted was just a bit of movement that like patriarchy is not necessarily the word I'd use for it in the same way that like when I'm talking to like people who are black supremacists, they want to talk about blackness as a political rather than racial thing. So like I'm usually happy to adopt language, but I think there are linguistic differences here in how I'd use that language with a bit more nuance.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
So I think patriarchy is potentially what's a good way to put this? I think patriarchy is divisive along gender lines, whereas I think, especially historically speaking, the issue is class and power. And generally speaking, if you're a woman within like the upper echelon court systems, you wielded far more power than pure patriarchy would suggest you did.
Well, not exactly though, because under a patriarchal system, the issue is not so much that women would not have any power and have no levers on power. The issue is that you actually have a bifurcation of classes into subclasses as well. And so you have, for example, women being forced into a situation where they're working from home, they're bearing children, This is why you see people talk about reproductive labor and things like that. That's like a necessary part of the reproduction of your species. It's a necessary part of like keeping people capable of working, et cetera, et cetera.
So this comes up in the debate. Like Jake's like, well, even if you're an upper class woman, you'd be at home taking care of the kids, which isn't true. Upper class women, like aristocracy or even upper middle class women within Britain, like even through the 1800s, did not take care of children. That was not their role. They had nannies, nursemaids, boarding schools. Upper middle class women did not raise children, and working class women,
but they still, however,
worked.
They still have
like they
kids
went to the factories and the fields at like the age of 5. Women worked. The idea that working class women did not perform manual physical labor alongside men is a myth, and it's a myth that feeds into a right wing. It feeds into a right wing narrative that women have never done anything except exist in some weird 1950s delusion of what homemakers were like. It's like a very small period of history where women have been pure homemakers.
Wealthy women would not have necessarily raised their children, but they would have been the ones who interfaced with the nannies, first of all, and then secondly, they would have been the ones who still had to bear the children. And the bearing the children part would not have been very strongly in the realm of optional, right? This would be a thing that was sort of expected of you. So
True, and it had high death rates.
Yeah,
that is
so...
true.
But
this is...
Yes.
Just very quickly, and then I'll let you respond. But it's really important to recognize, and I bring up pop culture in this, and Jake dismisses it, but pop culture is a really important historical reference. There's a reason in plays like Macbeth that Macbeth isn't coming home and saying, I'm going to kill the king. It's his wife pushing him towards it, because women were seen in courtly situations as political movers in the same way men were. Like, women...
No, so look,
because...
Yes, and like, in recent history, we had a lot of women moving into factory work, etc., because of the dearth of men due to war. But what I'm getting at here is that what you're talking about is not something else as an explanation besides patriarchy. What you're talking about is something else as an explanation that is inflected and motivated by patriarchy at some critical level. So I think that's principally where you're going to find a disagreement here. Because like you're right, like it's not simply the case that patriarchy is sort of this absolute ideal obtained in all instances. That's one of the reasons why it's sort of an absurd thing to obtain on intellectual grounds. But it is.
I think the problem is like you
yeah.
will have we may disagree on some nuances here, but we could have a conversation about this. This is just Jake saying buzzwords at me for 4 hours.
Okay, well let's give him 15 minutes. Okay, let's see.
Okay.
15 minutes. I think it's a fair.
Sure.
Okay. If he says nothing in 15 minutes and it was a dud. It was a dud.
It's the red herring that's sold by the red pill. But fundamentally, what these people need is an environment where they can feel validated. And those previous validations that you pointed out, like money, status, and everything else, are basically the things of respect that men sort of crave in a different way to kind of the needs women seem to crave emotionally. Men seem to be much more content.
Do you think that those are valid social cravings?
What, for things like respect or
No. Like you like respect in general is normal, but like you're talking about the type of respect that a man specifically is trying to seek in like how he does under capitalism and how he does in relationships and how he's perceived in under masculinity by his peers, stuff like that. Like, do you think
I don't think this is just true under capitalism. I think this is. I think. This
well, I
is
agree.
True
I'm saying.
I'm not constructivist. So I think this was true under feudalism. I think it's true under communism. I think fundamentally, unless you're meeting those needs in men, I think men will be miserable.
The phenomenon of how we measure manhood is not the same under any of those systems, so they're different. Yeah.
No, but generally speaking, like when you're looking at let's take like communism as a thing of like where men ended up within those systems. They still ended up, if we're looking at the USSR or anything else, within like military roles, within factory roles, within like traditional like male roles, right?
Can you explain? I'm perplexed by this point too.
So generally, like we're talking about manhood and like where men sort of naturally seem to gravitate towards without massive social change. So whatever system you're putting on them, it's not just. This was a point about him saying like it's patriarchy interfacing with capitalism, but my argument is that's true of basically all systems, whether they're feudal, capitalist, communist, whatever. Men still seem to gravitate towards naturally male roles.
Okay, but here's why I'm perplexed by this though. So when we're talking about, for example, like the military in the USSR, you're talking about a heavily patriarchal and traditionalist society that is not even industrially modern, being deployed in a war effort by a state within a capitalist system, like while it's actively undergoing a revolution, so it hasn't even transitioned to being under the government of a specifically socialist government.
This was true. This was true post like even post Cold War, right?
It would take
like where
it would take significantly.
Changes.
I would defy you that it takes under a couple hundred years to reverse that in that way. You're talking about upending the traditional way of life of a vast expanse of people who have been like deeply
that would
traditionally
be
religious for a very long time. The point I'm making is that you're not talking about men and women grown in test tubes in like some pure lab environment
in like a vacuum,
seeing like where they end up. Yeah.
We're not talking like Plato's Republic style like mass overhaul of basically pulling people away and rebuilding things. But that's kind of my point. Like the problem as I see it and describe it here is that right now we are still in a situation where men are captured within whatever system was before us, whether like we're in late state capitalism now. And part of the issue we seem to be having is that transition is not smooth because no allowance is being made for the time period like we're coming from, basically.
Okay, but hang on a sec. That's not an argument though against patriarchy being the explanation. That argument actually fits perfectly well with patriarchy being the explanation. You have a patriarchal paradigm that obtains prior to this transition being made, and therefore, it's a force that you have to reckon with. It limits the types of people who are produced capable of manning these jobs because women are not raised to have these roles, men are, so on and so forth. Right? And there's social
yeah,
expectations
sure,
that there's like shame in the association under certain cases. So it
yeah, no,
becomes
no,
difficult that
sure.
way. Yeah.
I agree with you, but at the same time, I think what's a good way to put this? When we're analyzing the problems here, and like I think at this point of the conversation, we're
Yes.
talking about like where I see those issues. This is again, Jake keeps bringing it back to patriarchy. I'm not there to have a conversation about patriarchy. I'm there to have a conversation about male loneliness, and I'm merely like
I see.
pointing out the
Okay.
issues. Now, Jake may be saying, "Well, that's patriarchy." I don't see how that's actually fucking productive, other than like, well, we can say it's patriarchy and that's what's causing male loneliness. My argument with Jake is, firstly, I agree with Jake that this isn't a woman's problem to solve because it's inherently a male issue. It actually, a lot of incels, when they get partners, it doesn't solve the problem anyway. Like, it is something.
Well,
that
I would
we
say
as men
I
need
would
to
I would
do.
actually counter you a little bit there, and very carefully. I think that when you have a growing population of people who are becoming antisocial and hedged into sort of bigoted or toxic attitudes towards other people, I think that is like a society-wide issue. I think where I would strongly disagree with most people who would make that argument is that it is not therefore the responsibility of society to brute force other people into a patriarchal mold to satisfy their needs. That is, I think, sort of like the line that someone like Tate or even someone like Jordan Peterson makes, where it's like, well, maybe society needs to rein in like the sexual liberty of people so that there's enough to go around, so to speak, like women are a resource. So I think
Sure, I think
Yeah.
I again I agree with you. I
Yeah.
think my arguments are largely that like there needs to be provision of male spaces. So when I say that again carefully, because that's a very broad brush statement.
Yeah.
It's things like I think it's really interesting at the moment that a lot of men seem to be gravitating towards things like Warhammer 40,000. I think it's quite interesting that like there seems to be almost bastion places of maleness that are getting reinforced over time. I think that's indicative of a need. I don't think those things should be fought against. Actually,
Well, I can
think
tell
they
you.
should
I can tell
almost-
you one of the reasons why a lot of men would probably find it easier to get involved in things like Warhammer 40K than women would. One of them would be, let's say you're living in the suburbs and you're a one-car household. The man who works, travels to and from, passes by Games Workshop more frequently. The woman's expected to take care of the kids after school. Like that's going to be like stuff like that. You're going to have patriarchal expectations that are going to radically determine who ends up where.
I don't know if that's true. I think when you look at like the way Crowder was treated by the media and everyone who watched that, left and right, generally speaking, there was like an understanding of the way he treated his wife was inherently a fucked up thing to do.
Sure.
Women like. I don't know. Again, like I feel like
Yeah.
women in those relationships still are being given much more time than they were like even like 10 years ago, and like way more than like 30 years ago.
Well,
The
it's
expectation
not.
of
It's not a
women still
matter.
having life
Yeah, but it's not a matter of like there being like a, I don't know, like a czarist level of
No, but
labor
I
on
think
women in the
But
household.
there's a difference between like getting involved in like 40K, whereas like okay, so why?
No. I'm
why are
just
we
pointing out.
seeing
I'm just
the
pointing out. I'm just pointing out that these aren't fundamentally male spaces. These are.
same- I think things like Games Workshop are still fundamentally.
But
male spaces.
apropos of what? Because if there are reasons based in patriarchal norms, for example, that give rise to it or could give rise to it, and you haven't excluded those, I'm not entirely sure on what basis you're saying that these are fundamentally male spaces. It seems like
I
these are
think in
incidentally
the same
male
way
spaces
that
at best at
okay,
this
would
point.
you agree?
Yeah.
Would you agree that there are some spaces that are seen as good because they are more female dominated, as in like places that like women can be comfortable amongst other women?
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking. Can you rephrase that?
I think there is a need for people to have, for some people, not all people, to have a space where they feel comfortable around their own gender.
No, but when
or
we're
their
talking about
own,
when we're
like,
talking about
culture and
when we're
things.
talking about the influence of patriarchy, what we're specifically talking about is what produces people's comfort levels around certain kinds of things, right? That's what's at stake. Like, incidentally, I agree. Yeah, there are a lot of women who prefer the idea of pink rooms somewhere where they have tea with other women and only other cis women, by the way. Same with bathrooms and so on and so forth. The question is, what gives rise to that need? And if you haven't accounted for the need may be incidental upon like certain cultural configurations or certain histories or whatever, in which case you need to find a way to remove that in order to make the claim that this is essentially a male or a female space. Simply pointing out the fact that like large numbers of demographics under specific conditions agree with this, and they're always under specific conditions. That's not like particularizing my counter in any way. Simply pointing out the existence of those preferences is not a roundabout way of saying that those preferences are simply a given.
I think it's multifaceted. I think that some of it's certainly cultural. It's difficult because we can never, in the same way.
I would say it's all culture. Look, even at a basic biological level, if you want to go that route, we are a species that.
Well, I'm not a constructivist, so I would say some of it's.
But you are a constructivist. You're an evolutionist, yes.
Well, I'm.
Would you? Well, I mean, do you not agree that the human form, in all of its variety and particularity, is emergent as a consequence of its interaction with its environmental factors? We are entirely constructed down to the molecule.
Okay, when I say I'm not constructivist, I think that's a little picky.
You mean you're a dualist? You mean you're a dualist? You mean that bodies and physical objects, they aren't fixed, they are conditioned by nature. They are dependent upon particular circumstances to assume the form that they do.
Sure, like
but the social interactions between those things are like Platonic forms.
I think that some things are going to be based on our biology in the same way that they are for any animal. Like, I think humans are more complex and we can overcome our biological urges. We certainly have biological urges towards violence that socially we can overcome. But there are
biologically urges towards violence. What are you referring to?
Well, I think that's just the basic one, isn't it? Like,
you think we're basically predisposed towards violence?
All primates have like certain things in common. When this is like why like studies on chimps going to war is important.
Do not chimps also have family groups and cooperate? Why would we assume that violence is definitive and not the reverse?
Well, I was just using. I'd say that family groups is also another great one. I think the fact that we build like family or tribal groups, I think there's biological elements there. We're a tribal animal. And yes, that's going to come through like evolution and selection.
But it's not just going to be evolution and selection, though, because it's going to be a little bit more particular than that. So when we're talking about, for example, the organization of family groups, at some point that's going to be a condition of organisms happening to organize in particular fashions, and that fashion providing some kind of survival advantage that allows that thing to persist, assuming natural selection is the only factor involved. And so at that point we would have a family group formation that is actually the result of the culture of our ancestors, or not of our ancestors necessarily, but of the ancestors of chimps, say.
But I mean, again, like there's a difference there between when I say constructivist, I'm saying constructivist from the point of view of the kind of like.
You mean that gay Foucauldian shit? I gotcha.
Yeah, before you go too deep into this, but yeah, okay, sure. I mean, I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I'm sure there are some things that are going to appear to be biological trends that aren't. And humans are not that old as a species or society. What are we, like 60,000 years out from the last, from the migration?
You're the expert.
Is that it? So, I mean, again, we've got like certain like anthropological bylines that seem to be consistent, which isn't a surprise because 60,000 years actually isn't a long time. Even when we're looking at major religions, I mean, we're looking 4,000 to 6,000 years.
I'm joking, Brooks. Relax. Sorry. All right, let's press on with this. Let's see where this goes quickly. I said 15 minutes. We made it 1. Let's finish this.
Okay, but I would consider that the systems that came out of those societies to be fundamentally within patriarchy. So it wouldn't. That's
okay. Do you think? Okay, let's put it this way. Do you think there is a system where we can basically then teach men to be more like women?
Have you read Butler by chance?
No, I haven't read her.
Give her a look. It's short. She has a reputation of being obtuse, but she's actually fairly elegant. I would give the first couple of chapters of Gender Trouble a read. You'll actually find it really interesting.
And feel
more like women or anything like that. No.
It's of more general interest than the title might make you think.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Well, tradition, not okay. So
you seem to be very. There's a lot of weight put on the gender of a person in this conversation because. It comes down to like male expectations and stuff. Reject the fucking expectations. Those expectations that you have of yourself based on the toxic masculine standards by which the world operates. Like each of us know, whether you'll admit it or not. Well, you might, but I mean, like a tape bro probably wouldn't. that manhood is pretty much subjective to the person experiencing it. Like, I'm a man in a way that other men, definitely more toxic guys, wouldn't agree that is manly. Like, nice to my wife, you know what I mean? like there's not a one size fits all to the answer of like how to fix loneliness in general. But like I said, when we're talking about male loneliness, like when I hear Shoe on Head and other right wing groups and MRAs talk about male loneliness, what they're talking about is always like, oh, it's just a bunch of socially awkward guys that can't get girlfriends. Like, we're not talking about, like, what kind of loneliness do you want to talk about? Because we could prescribe some things.
Okay, so I think the fundamental loneliness is like, I don't think it's just the statistics of people being outside of relationships.
I agree,
because I think
it also includes like platonic stuff.
Yeah, I think people aren't finding those things. So I was talking to somebody else earlier, and I think the term we were using was kind of like third area relationships. So the traditional things you get in a vocational job, for example, like you're like friends that you're working with in a trade, or like the friends from the office, where you'll get not building sort of a deep interpersonal relationship, but you've kind of got a different kind of mutual respect relationship. So, and I mean, one of the reasons I'd say this is because I get an awful lot of validation from my work life. I consider my colleagues separate from, like, they're not people I would randomly ring up and be like, hey, do you want to go for a beer? But they're people like day to day I will talk to and we'll be able to discuss complicated technical stuff. And we both have that mutual level of respect that we're competent in our roles. And I think that that's missing for a lot of people. I don't think it's something like the red pill solves, but I also don't think the prescription of
vocational specific stuff?
I think that's one of them, yeah. So I think like kind of those vocational relationships, I think male spaces are really important and have been eroded. I think that's another reason that a lot of guys feel
What kind of male
lost.
spaces are you talking about?
I think simple things like male clubs, like pubs. I think sports and leisure kind of environments, kind of social clubs that like hobbies, for example. I think this is one of the reasons that you get so much pushback when people want to like make things like Warhammer 40k more inclusive, because they're viewed as almost safe spaces for men. And
right,
I think
but then
that
those same
happens on
men
the other
reject
side
the
like that.
concept of safe spaces. You know what I'm saying? Because they're toxic about it.
Yeah, but they don't have to. But
that's what I'm saying. Like, this is endemic to the problem. This is why I say in the tweet it's men's internal issue. Because when we do talk about this and we talk about the intersectionality,
I mean, so I think he's actually just correct here, unfortunately. Beckett, I'm going to be honest with you, because like the issue here is the need for a men's only space in the first place. Like the fact that the erosion of that, so to speak, that constitutes like a psychological trauma, or like the diminution of their feeling of being belonging in society is precisely downstream from the fact that their identity is of being the brute, agential, violent opposite of passive femininity. It's precisely that they take to be sort of encroaching on their space. And we're talking about like the making like things like Warhammer 40k more open to other groups or whatever, stuff like that. I think he's correct. No, we're not going to go through the 4 hours.
I mean,
of this,
it doesn't.
so,
Okay,
yeah.
to be clear, it doesn't.
Yes.
It goes downhill.
I'll take your
much
word for it. So
more later.
look.
But
I'll meet you.
It doesn't surprise me that you agree with him, and that's fine.
And shouldn't. But I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, like,
I'm going to throw you a bone though, just very quickly,
Sure.
because we came here to talk about the upcoming thing. This is unsatisfying from the position of somebody for whom the tendencies of people in society now are treated as a given. Because the critique that Jake is making is that the way we are raised to need these particular kinds of things and to identify as particular kinds of things, that in itself is botched. If, however, you take that as natural, and you presume that's natural, then taking that sort of paradigm-destroying attitude towards it is not going to be very appealing. You're not going to take it very seriously, because any solution that you're going to want is going to be at a lower resolution, where you're talking about fixing contradictions within the system as opposed to critiquing the whole system, right?
So, okay,
Yeah.
so my actual problem with it is the fact that when we said earlier that, and when you said like, okay, well, those aren't going to be perfect systems within communism or anything else because those take hundreds of years to form. My critique is the fact that social formation hasn't occurred. So while you may be right that those spaces are not something we'd want to idealize anyway, and therefore like their erosion isn't something we should be worried about, my argument is that because those spaces have been eroded quite rapidly, and I think they have, whether we're talking about like groups, clubs, or what we view as safe spaces for men, again, whether those people understand them as safe spaces or not, they're causing a problem because it is forcing people to a position where they end up seeking what is currently a social need in much more toxic environments like the red pill. That's my critique. So when we're looking at like groups that do provide that safe male space, I'd argue that that is currently needed. And if we are looking at solutions to try and pull people away from like the red pill and incel space, which I think we can agree, I mean, I'd hope you'd agree is a dangerous space. I think the incel space
I would
is
say so, but
dangerous
I think
for
it's
men.
symptomatic, not causal. And so here's where I would push back. We could take sort of the Band-Aid approach and try to maintain existing spaces in a particular kind of way, but the center of gravity is already towards those leading to a situation wherein these people find these unsatisfying, or their speciality breaks down, or whatever, for various reasons. And so arresting the opening up of society to other people counter to patriarchal norms doesn't really solve the problem. It just tacitly gives water to the people who offer the red pill solution, while not actually addressing the problem at its root. And the problem at its root is what gives rise to the need for these spaces to begin with. And so, like, yeah, you might make some guys feel like they're sort of comfy for a little while if you discourage women from playing Warhammer or from going into certain sports or whatever. But at a certain point, you're just not going to be able to do that forever. There are going to be women or trans women or trans men or whatever who want into these spaces. You're going to have society opening up more and more to the reverse as well, towards men wanting into spaces traditionally considered female. There's a reason why, for example, the male flight attendant is still the butt of a lot of comedy films. Like that's going to happen, and so you're still going to have that exact same slide into the same conclusion. Yeah.
I don't disagree with you, but I would say that the ripping off the Band-Aid thing, there is an inherent risk there that we're seeing the results of. And while I agree with you that these are symptomatic, at the moment, what I see from Jake, and again, like you say, well, that's not the core problem. You have to address the core problem. I agree with you. But how do you address the core problem? And until you have a satisfactory answer of how to address that problem, where it's actually going to reach the men who are falling into inceldom, why not just leave the Band-Aid on until we have that solution? Because unless we do, all you're doing is like
the reason why we're even talking about this came to be before we started talking about it. It's sort of trivial, which means in advance of these discussions even taking place, people were already freaking out about male spaces being intruded upon, and the reaction from
you're having the same thing with the gender critical community. It's why the gender critical community is regurgitating like alt-right arguments from
precisely.
Like,
but as I was actually saying earlier, moderating yourself to accommodate those people doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't stop it from accelerating. It actually seems to have no effect at all. It seems to do nothing but weaken.
To be clear, it's not about just leaving. It's not about just leaving all spaces. I'd argue that it's finding those spaces that have. What's the best way to put this? There is a difference between a vocational trade job that is male dominated and can be exclusionary to women as it currently stands, and the impacts it is going to have on the men within that, and potentially like their outcomes, to something like the red pill or like crypto communities, which are very male dominated and highly misogynistic and highly toxic in a way that's very outward looking in their opinions of women. So there is a difference in, and again, this is the pragmatist in me, of fighting every single front in a battle, as opposed to taking things piecemeal and understanding that there are some things that are more important to tackle first. So
there is an error that some people who attempt sort of like political strategies of this type make, which is to assume that because you have slowed down the the pace of your policy or of your reform, that therefore the transformations already taking place in society slow down with you. And that's not necessarily a given. There is no reason to think, especially at this juncture, that leaving the Band-Aid on will not result nonetheless in like will not have any effect on the rapidly escalating support for things like the red pill or for people like that. There's no reason to believe this. For one thing, these things have their own impetus. The people who head it have their own reason to continue to inflate the issue beyond what it actually is, and sort of like how the whole trans woman peeping in women's bathroom thing, despite the tremendous dearth of examples. The horrible side effects of HRT on teenagers, despite the overwhelming dearth of examples. It doesn't need to be truly the case for it to be used propagandistically as if it is. So I don't think that would have any positive effect at all. I think the only thing you would achieve is cutting the legs out from the movement that would actually attempt to actually cure the issue at its root. I think that's the one thing we can't do. I think it's worth absorbing the hiccups rather than killing the patient to stave off symptoms.
Okay, but like, I don't necessarily fully disagree with you. I think my problem isn't your analysis. My problem is the reality on the ground, because what you're describing isn't what I personally am seeing. What I'm seeing in those conversations is people like, "Oh, boo-hoo, men are sad. Who fucking cares?" And my arguments,
that's not a good answer. That's not a good answer.
Yeah, and and this is what prompted this. So my argument is the lack of empathy towards what's happening with men and how they're adapting is further compounding those issues. Now there are some
very quickly. Did Jake take a boo-hoo, men are lonely stance?
I think at some point his wife certainly does.
Well, he's not his wife. Let's be fair.
No, I know, but his wife gets dragged in. But yes, like generally speaking, the position is that men have like controlled patriarchal systems for centuries. Therefore, it's men's time for this to happen.
Yeah, that's dumb.
Like,
but I don't think the argument that patriarchy and attendant things like toxic masculine norms, for example, I don't think
okay, so to like lay out as well, like, because I said this to one of Jake's mods, part of the problem with this conversation is, and this is why you'll notice, like, again, I end up becoming way more combative than I normally do when Jake starts talking about patriarchy. Because when Jake is talking about patriarchy and slowly breaking down those points, what Jake is looking for from me is a win. He's looking for me to go, oh, it's patriarchy. Now, I can do that, like, with you and take those concessions that maybe, like with more nuance, like, because I'm not a feminist, I'm going to have more issues with, like, that from a... what's the word? More ideological way that we have those conversations. But I understand what you're saying, and you're not trying to just get a fucking win on me. With the way Jake continues to frame this debate with me, he's just looking for that concession so it can be a win. That's how that conversation felt, and then it stops being productive. Because I think you know me well enough now to know that I'm not ever going into a conversation with anyone just because I want to come out the other side looking like I've won something. That doesn't mean anything to me. But
I'll hold my tongue. I was going to make a joke, but continue.
No, but genuinely, I'd rather have the conversation. And if I'm wrong, I've conceded points before, and I've even changed my opinion on things. I mean, I did this with Viv Wolf. Viv Wolf, when we were talking about trans representation in the UK media, I was fucking wrong, and I changed my opinion based on that conversation. I have no problem doing that. That's not how this conversation felt to me. And maybe I should have come and had this conversation with you about incels, but it doesn't.
Well, I wouldn't pretend to be an expert. This is not my forte at all. But the only point that I would really highlight here is that when we're talking about male loneliness and the incel problem and things like that, we're fundamentally talking about something that specifically targets men for a reason, and it's not due to the inevitable physical and psychological traits of men. These are things that are conditioned socially. It's a specific permutation of that precise thing. It's
sure, and like even agreeing that my baseline of this conversation, where it came from with the tweet, was I just want people to stop looking at incels and saying boo-hoo male loneliness. That's not our problem, because fast becoming a major societal problem.
I'll take your word for it that at some point in the conversation, Jake is unkind towards lonely males. He's probably dismissive of the idea, for example, that the discomfort around, let's say, pubs and games workshop play areas and things like that being male spaces, that whole thing's sort of dissolving and becoming more inclusive. Like he probably, like, on the whole, when you're considering the social goods that are attempted to be attained by this opening up, that boo-hoo, I think, will absorb the loss, because that would be more or less my attitude. It's not like dismissiveness where it's like suffering men. It would be dismissive
it's just
towards
inherently dangerous. There is a reason that the alt-right back in like the early 2010s ended up choosing V and video games as their bastion to launch an assault on feminism and unite multiple male communities and cause something like Gamergate. That's well documented that Paul did that. There's a reason that so many memes that existed solely on Poll became Gamergate memes. And I would argue that, as I have before with a lot of these things, you are, not you personally, but there is the potential there to hand ammunition to the people that really do want to do damage.
Hand ammunition in the form of what?
When some of these conversations that you see on Twitter of, well, the real, like, before we can do anything for incels need to accept that the problem is their own toxic masculinity. These people are manically depressed, quite cut off, and have already been fed an load of information.
No. We can stop right there. So I agree with that. But like when people are making the argument that incels, for example, need to accept X, Y, and Z, they're not necessarily talking to incels. What they're talking about is that a program for correcting the issue is going to be one that actually corrects the underlying problem in the identity, because that's where this stems from. Now, some idiots, no doubt you'll find legions of them somewhere, will then take that to be a license to be cruel to people who sort of are in that position, who don't know any better, or who are like in such a dark place, even if they do, they can't get out. Like that's dumb and counterproductive. But I think in general, that's actually 100% true. You're not going to solve this with a Band-Aid or by sort of like making the waters of society more lukewarm to the things that they are demanding. You're just going to cut the impetus of the thing that's actually directed towards the correction of the underlying problem, because that's who you're telling to fuck off. You're not telling anybody else under those circumstances to like slow down and moderate your message than the only people who are actually trying to solve the problem. But everybody else is still fighting tooth and nail for the dominance of their stance. So all you've done in the end is you've advocated for the people who want this thing to actually be solved to close shop.
So
that's the Brianna Wu approach. That's why I have an issue with her.
Well, I think there's a difference between people who want to close shop, and okay, I've seen your arguments with Brianna. And look, I'm not going to have good opinions on Brianna Wu on either. Anyway, I am never going to forget the Total Biscuit shit. So I
figured that out. It's okay.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's what's good to put this. There is a difference between a nuanced conversation and the people who are using this as a way to weaponize their own bigotry against people and their own prejudices so they can feel better.
Look, lefties can be assholes, okay?
Yeah, like my criticism is against that assholism. And like while we can disagree on some of the methods and causes, and I'm sure like plenty of people are going to, because I'm not going to be as far over, I think that if there are spaces where men are congregating and just, I don't know, enjoying a hobby, injecting a political narrative into that hobby, which is, by the way, this happened with Battletech recently. Battletech went, they got rid of one of their like longest standing authors. There was a big infight in the community over it. And all that happens is you end up with a load of people who feel pushed out of the hobby that they belong to. And you have radicalized those people for the people who want to use them.
Well, not necessarily, because if they were taking issue, for example, I don't know the details of this case, but if, for example, they were taking issue with somebody having extremely sexist attitudes, they weren't less radical. They were just radical and comfortable. You're talking about people who were taking
they were taking issue with the fact that an author was pushed out because he was a Republican. and he was pushed out by some
Was
very
it just
new
because
community members.
he was a
Yes,
Republican,
it was
or
just
what?
because he was a Republican.
Okay.
That's why he was pushed out.
What year was
and
this?
then this was like this was about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. This isn't that long ago.
Oh, okay. So he was pushed out because he was a Republican when the Republicans are en masse targeting entire demographics of people in the United States.
Sure.
Okay,
And look, I'm not
so it's not
defending people who've
it's
been-
not just that he's a Republican. Then it's that he's a part of in support of a movement that is specifically targeting large members of the audience and the buyership. Right? That's a little different than just political prejudice.
No. I mean, if the argument is then that all Republicans are fair game, and if you want to like,
But
make
for
that
Republicans,
argument-
all trans
I can
people
see,
are
I can
fair
see
game.
someone in my chat like respond to that. The problem is like there are going to be people on the more moderate side who aren't particularly political who just vote Republican. There is a difference between targeting people like MAGA supporters and general Republicans, and picking those fights.
Look,
Is optically damaging. It provides ammunition to the people who are already saying they're out to get you. And like I mean, this is largely what I wrote about. I saw this happen with the race realism stuff, with the skeptic community.
Sure.
People who like fucking hated that shit. Like Teal Day. This is the classic Teal Day video. I'm not alt-right yet. And you are it and again I say you, but don't mean you personally. I see the inherent risk of turning people who are apathetic and do not give a shit into your enemies.
okay, but I was pro-Trump in 2016. I was very right-wing myself, and I was absolutely not turned by the moderating of people's messages. I had to educate myself out of it. The fact of the matter is that simply moderating your message and not giving motivated people who want you to lose anyways ammunition, they will find the ammunition that they need. And more to the point, if you allow people, for example, people who are perfectly comfortable with advocating for like the essential depersoning or just the fear-mongering and targeting of an entire population to begin with, and it's not just trans people, by the way, we're talking about Republicans in present day.
Sure.
Yeah, if you're allowing
Just
those
to be
people,
clear,
you're allowing those people,
fuck the Republican
no,
movement.
fair
and
enough.
fuck
I'm not.
like
I'm not
just
accusing,
just
yeah, no. To be clear too, I'm not accusing you of having any truck with them, but if you're allowing those people, for example, to have levels of influence within like your community or with your brand, that's going to be turned against those people as well. And there's no reason to think it magically would be less effective because you let them have more stature and more formal authority or formal presence than otherwise. That simply doesn't follow. At the end of the day, like, there is going to be a certain amount of futility because some people simply won't be reached. A lot of people won't be reached. And a lot of people only tune in to programs that give them the propaganda that they're already hungry for. You're not going to cure that by cutting the lifeline to your own message or by neutering it so that it doesn't have any existence at all.
Can I ask you another fandom question? Okay, are you a Star Trek fan?
Yes, I would say so. I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of it, but yeah.
Do you think Star Trek has always been political? Like Gene Roddenberry, very particularly, it's always been political. Do you think Star Trek is more or less effective at spreading a political message now than it was 30 years ago?
Than it was 30 years ago. You're talking about when would that be?
When it was like Next Generation.
30 years ago would be like
Deep Space
TNG
Nine.
and Deep Space Nine and Voyager. Yeah. Spreading a message. Well, at the time, it was ahead of the current. It was one of the earliest shows to represent, for example, non-pornographic.
First interracial kiss.
Well, that's going way back, a little bit more than 30 years, but non-pornographic, healthy, dignified same-sex relationships, for instance. That's a big one. After season 1, they finally elevated Diana Troy from being in a miniskirt to being in a deeply unfortunate bodysuit.
Let's not talk about the 7 of 9 shit. That stuff was just got ridiculous. But
the point I'm getting at though is like I would say it's not effective now precisely because it's now chasing the tail. It's not
okay. But when it was coming out.
No. But hang on. It's not less effective now because it's more inclusive. There was black protagonist in Deep Space Nine and a woman protagonist in Voyager. It's less effective now because it's behind the current and it's falling into awful like Marvel-esque tropes in order to sell itself to an audience of Zoomers. That's a different issue. The problem with modern Star Trek is that it's written very badly and cynically. It's not that it's too progressive.
This is true. And this argument happened during the Red Scare as well in Hollywood. There were movies coming out that were poorly written with basically very, very heavy communist messaging in them. And this isn't the first time this shit has happened. But when you look at the difference in media, people want to make...
What's the progressive messaging in Star Trek Discovery?
In Discovery?
Yeah.
God,
Is it because Michael Burnham's black?
No, God, no. It's
is it?
the messaging of so. Just a couple of examples.
Sure.
Essentially, men, some of the male characters, again, very poorly written, will question the female characters. They won't listen to their authority, and then they'll get fucking killed. There's an episode where, like one of the shorter episodes, where one of the crew members refuses to listen to his captain. He gets labeled a misogynist, and the captain.
Yeah. You're talking about the Tribbles one.
There are.
So literally every character. So literally every single funny side character that Tony Stark engages with. This is common with lead characters that attempt to be shown this way. They're basically just embodying toxically masculine tropes in a woman character.
Yeah, but it's wildly different from the way that like Star Trek used to represent.
I agree, but that's not Star Trek. No, I agree, but that's not Star Trek being progressive. That's Star Trek falling into the tropes of the medium.
But the point is, if you're trying to spread a message to somebody rather than preach to the choir, is it not more effective to take compromise at points and present more detailed messaging that doesn't necessarily look political? Whereas everyone looks at Discovery and goes, that's political. Whereas something like Lower Decks, for example, is very woke. But anybody who watches Lower Decks won't get that impression. The Harley Quinn cartoon, again, very woke, but it's well written. There are still nuances within it, so it can still spread a political knowledge.
No, I get it. No, I agree with you. Okay, like the trope of the girl boss being an arrogant jerk who just happens to have everything fall into her lap,
which is killing Marvel currently, right?
I think what's killing Marvel currently is primarily a lack of creativity in writing and making all of their series look about as unserious as like a Power Rangers episode. I think the issue with Star Trek, it's not that it's being progressive, it's that people have sort of assimilated the idea that having a jerk female lead be mean to a guy is therefore supposed to be a representation of female empowerment. But like this has already happened in Star Trek. Like for example, that Tribbles episode. There are so many, like how many like awful female admirals are there in TNG? Like this is like a trope. The only thing is that's a short. So this guy who is being, and he is, I believe, actually being subordinate in the episode, even though he has the better ideas. That happens to a lot of characters in TNG with respect to Picard. There will be a lot of people there who have a better idea, but they end up being put in their place because they were speaking out of line or whatever, or they were breaking like protocol, because it's not just an exploratory organization. I don't know if that's entirely true.
Like I think when you're looking at like characters like Berkeley, like the way Wesley develops, like when we go to Voyager, I forgot the name of the crew member who turns out to be a psychotic murderer who used to be like one of the Marquis. Like Star Trek's always been very big into redemption arcs of like actually characters moving through that arc and the way captains deal with them. That's still a fundamentally different thing. Now, again, like Discovery's base premise was completely fucking insane to begin with. It was basically like Captain Wacky Pants and his mutinous crew.
Oh no, like the mirror universe thing was garbage. In fact, I kind of liked the idea of having like a more sort of bitter, jaded, jingoistic captain. I think that would have been kind of an interesting thing to explore instead of just turning him to evil alternate universe Trump. But like,
I think it would have been. Do you know what? I think people would have been nicer to it if they hadn't called it Star Trek.
Oh, look, I'll meet you halfway there, okay? So one of the things, I think a better example would actually probably be something like The Boys. This is the one thing that annoys me about The Boys. So I like The Boys generally, but it'll try to insert itself into contemporary politics in a very cynical and disingenuous way. So, for example, all of a sudden in season 3, Homelander's ranting about being canceled. There's never been any of that language at all up until that point. Like that's obnoxious because that is disingenuous. That's just making a fictional story and saying, "Aha, see, the bad guys talk like you." That's obnoxious. I don't really see that happening with Star Trek except for the Mirror Universe episode, and fair enough on that point. I think like the issue with modern Star Trek is not that it's more progressive than earlier Star Trek or too progressive for a modern audience. The issue with modern Star Trek is that it's being written by idiots.
I think it's a lot more preachy.
I don't think it's preachy at all. I think it's just stupid.
Okay, I mean, look, I'm not disagreeing with you that it's stupid. I do think it's more preachy. Okay, like we've gone down a rabbit hole, but yeah, like sure. What's a good way to put this? I think we're spoiled by things like DS9 because DS9 was very well written with quite strong characters that had strong identities. Whereas you look at something like Picard, and Picard doesn't feel or act the same way as he did in TNG.
Yeah.
He's miles away. But also, like, yes, there is much more heavy-handed messaging within Picard. Right,
I totally
down to
forgot
things
about
like
Picard. I was only thinking of Discovery.
Yeah,
but
there's right at the beginning of the first. I think it's like the first.
But I mean, hang
episode,
on, slow down.
Somebody talks to him about a sci-fi book.
But let me stop you
and
right there.
He's like, I guess I don't. Hold on, just let me finish this.
Okay.
It's like, I guess I just never really understood sci-fi, which is a reference to a Twitter argument like fucking Patrick Stewart had. Like shit like that is much more fucking heavy-handed, right?
No, Brooks. It's the language of cancellation that's new to season 3. Jesus Christ. But what I was going to say, hang on, very quickly. What I was going to say is that actually Star Trek Picard went significantly less progressive, anti-progressive, in fact, compared to TNG, and I'll tell you why.
Go on.
At the end of season 1, with no,
I didn't get that far, so
okay,
possibly.
I did at the end of season 1, with no development whatsoever, at a long shot, as the ship is, I think, about to launch into life space. At the last shot of the episode, the last episode, is like a wide shot of the ship they're on, and they're at a table, and 7 of 9, and I forget what her name is, the woman with the mother, or the woman with the son who disowned her. They're like holding hands at the table almost romantically. That's like the blurry background shot of the lesbian couple kissing in like The Rise of Skywalker. That's substantially less progressive, which is embarrassingly holding like the weirdos of society sort of almost off screen, as opposed to having like them actually being like relevant features of the world as such. That's substantially less progressive. That's actually pandering. I think what you're talking about is literally just bad writing, which, by the by, we curiously enough are fine with Dr. House getting away with all of the same stuff that bitchy Tribbles captain lady gets away with. Like it fundamentally, like it's not that it's too progressive. It's actually kind of the opposite. It's that it's taking toxic masculinity as the benchmark for agency.
So, well, I think my point is the fact that because the arguments are, well, the politics are right, so we don't have to put in work into how the messaging is conveyed.
Yes.
So, as opposed to, like, I think that old Star Trek was just as sort of trying to be progressive for its time, but there was more work put into that. By the way, just a quick pivot. If I'm going to read Judith Butler, you're going to have to send me the title of one of her books that you want me to read.
Gender Trouble. It's short. It's easy to...
Gender Trouble.
easier to
Okay. Have you read The Boys graphic novel? Have you read the original graphic novel?
I tried. I didn't like it.
Did you not like it? I enjoyed Boys.
I thought it was dumber. I didn't like it. It was violence porn. I'm just not that interested. I just don't care.
I mean it is. It is.
I read it and I was just like,
the show is as well. Come on.
It's got elements of that, but it has more charm and wit than the comic does, from what I've seen. It seems like the visual is basically all there is, which makes sense. It's a comic, but I'm not a fan.
I don't know. I'd say it gets more developed later on, in my opinion, but I think that also comes down to...
I read ahead. I think
the characterization in the comics, especially of the boys themselves, is much stronger.
Okay.
I think
That's
Huey
possible.
actually has an arc because
Well,
I don't feel like
Huey's
he
a
has.
radically different character in the comics. Like
Yeah,
Huey's
he's
like a gruff, bald bloke in the comics. He's not like a
yeah.
who kicks A Train's head in. Like he's not the peace mongering wimpy little hippie, right?
He's definitely more questioning, but I like his arc in the comics. You'll never read it, so I'll just tell you. Like by the end, he basically just
I've
takes
already
over.
read
And
most of it.
he ends up as just
Yeah.
like he ends
Yeah.
up basically like filling in as Butcher's role, which is it's an interesting like full arc from where he was. Anyway,
Yeah.
okay, we have dissected a lot
Jake
of
and
this.
religion. Let's finish this off. So
Jake and religion. Yeah,
let's get this off.
Jake and religion. How you feeling about a conversation about Jake and religion?
I think it's going to be awful, and boring, but we will persevere.
Interestingly, you're an old Sargon fan, so you must know Jake frequently, right?
You got really quiet again. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now? I swear it's just like
Do
you
you
hear
have
me?
do you have like is your microphone like on your earphone on your headset?
no, it's
Oh,
here.
okay, now I can hear you. I don't know what the hell's going on. Sorry,
Okay.
say again. Something about
Right.
Sargon?
Well, Jake used to move in those circles. He's one of the old atheist crowd.
Oh, was he? I haven't.
Yeah.
I never really paid attention. I was a theist back when I watched Sargon.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, he intersected with that. What's your
I
actual
see.
position with arguing with Jake?
With Jake,
Yeah.
his position seems to be that if you are black or indigenous and you are Christian in contemporary society, that is solely due to the influence of colonialism, and you have no agency or capacity to think for yourself and arrive at the conclusion. Whether or not I have respect for the conclusion, it fundamentally treats these people as part of a blob that has an essential nature different from everybody else, and like their beliefs and so on and so forth don't count because he knows better than them. I think it's a gross attitude to have.
It's interesting because that's my.
disrespectful.
So I'm probably a bit more unfair to Jake than I would say. Actually, probably after my conversation with Jake, he's of all the people I've had conversation with, he's the one who rubbed off on me the worst. He seems to treat minority groups as monoliths, in my opinion. And anyone who's outside that monolith is essentially just like a traitor or to be dismissed or lying in some way. That's my impression of him. It seems to be just like he's the arbiter. He knows what the truth is. Everyone else is just lying or coping. It's very frustrating.
I don't have any retort. That seems to be what I've seen. I will say that it is sometimes like fine to dismiss people on the grounds of taking positions that you think are philosophically untenable if someone's being serious. Like for example, I think the idea that Counterpoint's made that you should take somebody being black as a red flag when, for example, deciding to ask somebody out on a date because they might have negative interactions with their family or something like that. I think that doesn't bear
Wait,
any-
when did Connor say that? That's insane.
That was to me, actually. I asked him directly. Oh yeah.
What? Fucking what? Okay.
So, for example, I'm not going to be like, well, that's just your opinion, and I disagree with it, but I respect that you took some time and effort to get there. It's like, no, you're first of all, you did not do any work to arrive at that position. If you say you are, I think you're lying, because no way in hell. I think you have that position because it's cozy for you, and I'm going to run with that. However, when we're talking about something a little bit more generalized, we're talking about somebody like talking about something where it's like there's a large degree of ambiguity there, because the fact of the matter is, my proclivity to being heavily critical of Christianity or religious beliefs generally, or a lot of metaphysical beliefs that have that sniff of it, notwithstanding, like I don't have any definite means to say like, no, God definitely doesn't exist, no, wasn't the prophet of or the son of or whatever. I have no basis for saying so. That's outside of my purview. I do have reasons to think like, hey, look, actually, when you see how this stuff came about, there are some reasons to expect that somebody would take this stance, or there are reasons to not trust this, or there are reasons to hold this narrative in suspension. Like, for example, do you know who translated this text that you're relying upon for this claim? Do you know what source they were using? Do you know what they translated? Do you have like a strong like historical connection between the text that you're receiving now and the original people who wrote it and when, and do you have any way to verify the events that they claim took place, things like that. Like, and all of these like different like points that you could fixate on, these will create issues where if you're going to speak confidently about these things, I'm going to take a lot of serious issue with that. But are they untrue? Ultimately, who knows? Like, you can suspend that. You wouldn't suspend it very seriously. You probably act like these things are untrue or just irrelevant because unverifiable, sort of out of hand. But you wouldn't like positively say that somebody must be deranged to conjecture the possibility, or that people are necessarily lying when they consider it. First of all, I come out of that space. I used to be theistic myself, so I understand that people, even if they don't recognize that they have strong emotional reasons for holding something, they can still nonetheless work very, very hard to try and confirm it, and their judgment can still be corrupted by that emotional need. But they're not for that reason not trying either. They're not clear on what they're actually trying. Maybe they're trying to actually settle their beliefs by getting rid of sources of anxiety and disproving like atheist critiques of religion or things of that sort. But they're still trying, and they're still honestly getting there, at least as far as they are concerned. So I would never say that no, you're not actually a Christian because you don't realize the colonial strings that are pulling on your brain. So really, you think you're free, but you're actually just like your slave ancestors 100 years. Like, no, I'm sorry. There's a line, and at a certain point, when you're completely overriding the dignity of the people you're talking to, that's where I draw it. That's my issue with Jake. If he wanted to make the very modest claim, the very reasonable claim that, hey, the reason why you have so much Christianity amongst the black community in the United States, which a lot of which, an overwhelming number of which, does hail a direct connection to slavery at some point. If you want to say that the proliferation of those churches is due to colonialism and due to religion being imposed on the cultures of people who were taken as slaves, sure, that's probably true. And that can also factor into the amount of people who end up being converted later on. But that doesn't mean that their identity or their beliefs are somehow invalid. They may have like gone by ways that you don't respect to get there, or they may have been conditioned by factors in their environment that you wish weren't around. But that doesn't take away the fact that no, there are indigenous Christians and there are black Christians, and they are actually Christians.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting things there, just historically speaking. Firstly, like when black people started wanting to convert, when slaves started wanting to convert, because Christianity was in Africa before colonialism. As was Islam. These religions have been around a significant period of time, and largely because of the Roman Empire. Quite frankly, they've spread very far. But anyway, well, in the case of Christianity,
not without colonialism, to be fair, and Islam did spread imperialistically.
Yeah,
but like, yeah, no, I take your point. Like this stuff did spread long in advance, for example, of the transatlantic slave trade. But let's assume.
And Christianity was uncomfortable for slave owners, to be clear, because theistically speaking, you can't own Christians as slaves if you are a Christian. And that was a major concern. There are like records of debates on this. It took a long time. It actually took a decent amount of time to rectify within the system.
You're also supposed to love your enemies and even your neighbors as yourself. So I mean, under those conditions, like having slaves is a very difficult sell if you're taking the Bible, or the New Testament at least, very seriously.
So this is just very quickly. So this is one of those things where, like, for instance, things get eroded over time. Like, yes, early Christians would have taken that approach, and that's why Christians had the approach they did to the military. But then we had just war theory, and things changed. Christians.
That goes way before then. Like even Augustine, like they're first of all Roman soldiers who were converted in the Bible, and secondly, Augustine even argued that if you act as like the agent of somebody else, like in the case of the state, that's not just.
But Augustine is. Well, Justin's still considered the origin, even if Aquinas is considered the refiner. Like,
no, they're radically different. No, because just war is one that actually assigns justice to the activities of the state. What Augustine is arguing is that a Roman soldier, for example, even if he's a Christian, is not guilty of murder if he kills on behalf of the state as a result of his orders. That's Augustine's argument. What I was going to say, though, is like in addition to all of this, even the non-theistic liberals who were also against slavery and also later on against things like passports and border restrictions for ethnic minorities within the British Empire, things like that. The liberal stance itself is also conditioned religiously too. You don't have, for example, the insistence upon sincerity of belief that makes it so that the magistrate is is acting inappropriately if it tries to enforce religion on the citizenry, for example. That's the whole basis of John Locke's letter concerning toleration. But let's pretend, for argument's sake, that Christianity had no capacity to spread outside of colonialism, because my argument doesn't require that. The reason why we would even talk about that at all is because the fact that people could become Christians outside of colonialism sort of illustrates in a neat way that actually, you know what? There are other means besides slavers imposing religion on you for you to adopt a religious stance. And those didn't disappear just because slavery came into being. That would be the purpose of that. But even if that wasn't the case, it is still nonetheless the case now that there are, for example, black people who have become atheists, who have had children, who then converted. There are indigenous people who have been non-religious, who have had like traditional religion, or whatever, who have converted in the same way. Same for black people as well. Same for literally everybody. And so to blanketly say that an indigenous Christian or an indigenous Muslim or whatever simply doesn't count as such is absurd.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And again, everything is cultural osmosis. I mean, this is true of Buddhism. Buddhism is a religion that spread far and wide.
What about male spaces?
Let me think about that for a second.
Yeah,
do you know what?
That's what I thought.
I wonder if I'd defend that. In their formation, potentially. I mean, maybe there were tribes that died out in the last ice age where, like, our ancestors migrated and theirs didn't, that had wildly different views of how gendered spaces worked. I don't know.
The male pub tribes just had bitter cold resistance.
Yeah, well, wouldn't you? Alcohol's great for that. I've got Econoboi asking to join, by the way.
Oh, really?
Let's go.
Sure.
Sure. Right, give me a second.
Can I run to the washroom and grab some water?
Yeah, go on.
I'll meet you on my end so you can talk to your chat.
Welcome back.
All right.
I've messaged him. I'm waiting for him to respond.
Okay. I think you should be able to just add
Oh, okay.
I think
Right, yeah, there we go.
You should be able to add me.
I've added him. So give me a second and let me just add people to a DM. And I'll recall.
Sounds good.
Welcome back.
Heidi ho. Come on. Open up. There we go. All right. Boom. Hello.
You with us? You're live.
Let me fix my mic.
There you go.
Oh.
You shouldn't drink alcohol to stay warm, but it does make you feel warm.
Fuck! My chat's saying the same shit. This is a skill issue. Listen. My Irish heritage is telling me very clear things about alcohol and warmth.
Look, would you rather be freezing and drunk or freezing and not drunk? Seems like a pretty easy decision
Yes.
for me.
It's not even hard. This isn't even hard. It's not even hard. It's super easy. Oh. Yeah, no, I think the indigenous stuff is interesting, partly because I don't know. Again, it's this monolithic view that people just have no agency. 100 years later, multiple generations later, it does. It seems a little unfair, to say the least. Potentially slightly racist.
Here.
Welcome
Fixed
back.
it.
How you doing?
Saturday night, I've watched the fights. I got nothing to do, boys. I figured I see you guys talking. Could be fun. So here I am. There we go.
Welcome. We're discussing actual Jake and his weird arguments with everyone about Christianity. I think he meme posted about Prophet Muhammad as well, which is always somebody winning. I don't know, dude. We read through the Twitter thread yesterday, and it's
He doesn't like the Christians?
he doesn't like any religious people. He thinks religion is basically akin to a mental illness.
Well, I mean, I guess insofar as any ideology can cloud your judgment, I guess. I guess so. But
I don't know.
very-
It's kind of. I'd say it's a bit more extreme, basically, than that. And he
I mean,
basically anyone who disagrees
know.
with him, he accuses of being Christian. So
he accuses them of being Christian. Like, you're just a secret Christian.
that seems to be the trend. I mean, he did that with me when we talked. He was like, "Well, you're straight, you're white, you've never had to deal with anything." Because
You're
he just
straight,
leaves it
Beckett?
completely.
I thought you were
I'm
bi.
I am bi. That's the fucking.
Well, what the
annoying
hell,
thing.
Becky? You should have been like, I'm not even straight.
I did do that, and then he backed down because he was like, I got beaten up at Pride for being fucking bi.
Well, you're British. You know, he would have gone to something else. I don't know. That's so weird. I don't know. I did see his tweet about like black people are indoctrinated or something to be Christian. But I don't know. I mean, I guess. I mean, that is kind of true, right? That's that's almost like what was it? Oh shit, what was it called? I'm forgetting my world history. Where the Spanish basically forcibly converted all the
Reconquista?
native.
No. Oh, sorry. I wasn't paying attention. I just heard Spanish. I was like
The
forcibly-
conquistadors, obviously. I can't remember what the word
No. I was
for
gonna
it.
say Reconquista because I was thinking of Al-Andalus.
Yeah, but that's like,
That's
that's
a very
kind of
different
how
thing.
it happened, right? Yeah, because black people obviously were all kidnapped, and then, they went to
Start from the
they had to
beginning.
go
I
to
was
Sunday
distracted.
school and shit.
Where are you going with this again? I'm sorry. I was reading a thing.
No, because I was saying I did see the original tweet where Jake was saying that black people were like indoctrinated all to be Christian, but I mean,
which they were.
I guess that's kind of
like,
true. Yeah.
That is true. So, like, slaves absolutely did have Christian religion imposed on them. Interestingly enough,
Yeah.
if you read about it, the actual Christianity that emerged in a lot of cases was actually an eclectic hodgepodge of like tribal practices, sometimes Islam and Christianity. So I mean, it was yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. Like, obviously, we all, sort of environmentally, even if you, because Christianity is practiced differently across the world. Like, Middle Eastern Christianity is a fair bit different from, like, let's say, North American Christianity versus, like, Northern European or Asian Christianity. It's all a little bit different. Sometimes even the books are different. So, obviously the sort of, enslaved person Christianity is going to develop a bit differently, but I don't know. That's just kind of it's kind of like when I've gotten in arguments with people on Twitter where, they'll say, oh, whenever you see a whenever you see a woman who wears the hijab, that's just somebody who has been indoctrinated into a cult of sexism and this. And it's like, I mean, I guess I kind of get what you're saying in the sense that, their environment led them to probably dress a certain way. But I don't know, at the point of being like a full-fledged adult, I don't really know.
Well, I
if
mean,
that,
like you can hold these things both at the same time. So you can say somebody was, let's say, misled into taking beliefs seriously. They ended up subjugating them in some way, but they also did so sincerely, and they actually hold those beliefs. Like, these aren't contradictory. The bare fact that you can point out that there's something dishonorable about the nature of the beliefs themselves or how they acquired them doesn't counteract the identity. Like somebody who's been misled about the age of the earth and becomes a Christian on that basis is not less of a Christian because their geology is wrong.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess people have a hard time kind of reconciling the two because for me, it's just obvious, like, because basically when somebody says, "Oh, you're indoctrinated to dress a certain way," it's like, well, yeah, but we're all the way that we all dress is just a result of our environment. Obviously, we would dress a lot different if we were born in a different circumstance, but it's like it's not really saying anything. It's kind of hard to really glean anything from that because you could just as easily say, I mean, I've heard Muslims say, women in the Western world are indoctrinated in a male-dominated, world that teaches them to dress scantily clad and show their skin and stuff. And it's like, well, that's just as vacuous as the other statement as well. So I don't know. That's all cringe. I don't know. The actual Jake guy just seems like he's being cringe.
I have a suspicion that right now he's doubling down because I think his pride's been in it. I think he would probably, I would hope that in conversation he would wind that back a little bit, but we'll see. That hasn't been my experience so far. I've just realized I need to run soon. Realize the time. I'm a little bit curious since this is our first time talking and you're moderating the debate on the 29th, I believe. What's your opinion on that?
On the debate topic, honestly, I don't have an incredibly strong opinion. I mean, it seems like, from my understanding of Marx, he was pretty heavily influenced by Hegel. But that's really all that I can really say.
What's the debate?
Essentially, President Sunday and Phenomics got in a Twitter argument about whether or not, essentially, the Marxian analysis is significantly based on Hegelianism or Hegel's
yes,
thoughts.
Yes, it is.
And
why would anyone debate that? Of course it is.
That it's not based on Hegel's thought?
I mean, it's
no.
like
the initial claim was that. Here, let me see if I can't find the actual tweet, which I think I actually saved.
Yeah, we scheduled this a little bit far out, so it's hard to remember exactly what everybody
But
said.
Marx is well recognized as a Hegelian.
Not exactly. He's actually a critic of Hegel in a very deep way, but he was.
See, that's where President Sunday feels differently. So that's because I don't have a strong opinion.
Yeah, so this was the actual thing. Here, let me pull it up here so I can.
Well, but the methodology of the progress of production ownership as production increases is essentially Hegelian dialectics. It's a synthesis, a synthesis of thesis and antithesis. For the progress of history, it's still I'd still argue it's still within that format, which isn't a surprise. Everyone was Hegelian around the time.
Stop! You're wounding me. Okay, why is he not Feuerbachian, for example, or Kantian? What's the difference between the Hegelian dialectics and Kantian dialectics?
Why would he be Kantian?
It's an excellent question. Why? I mean, Hegel was largely Kantian. He took the form of his critique from Kant, large measure with modifications.
But when we talk about Hegel and his influence during the period, I mean, again, the argument of Hegel being pure. I'm very much of the camp that Hegel is not that complex and was not saying anything particularly groundbreaking.
You're really mistaken there. Hegel is incredibly complex and is saying something that's highly particular. That's actually the basis of one of Marx's earliest books, which is the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. He is one of Hegel's greatest critics. He also is one of his greatest beneficiaries theoretically. He had a great respect for Hegel on a philosophical ground, but he was even against the project of philosophy as Hegel understood it. He's a massive critic of Hegel. We'll get into it at the debate. I don't want to show what I can do before the.
I guess
arena,
my answer to that, to your question, I don't have my big thing is really just trying to understand the history of different economic sort of ideologies and stuff to the best that I can. I like the more applied debates, but at least like my most understanding of Marx is just going to be kind of roughly what Marx believed in, what he thought, and from there. But like his actual sort of intellectual foundation. I mean, I've always, it's like a cursory comment in most lectures. You'll see how Marx. Oh yeah, Marx was heavily influenced by Hegel. Like it's not really a very deep thing.
Well, that's like saying Hegel was heavily influenced by Aristotle. It's like, yeah, obviously.
Right. We're all. It's all derivative to some degree. Sure. Yeah.
Well, moreover, like there are definitely modern philosophers that don't assimilate Hegelian approaches. There are definitely ones that don't assimilate Kantian ones. There are also critics.
Sure, but that's also because like philosophy has become, should we say, more diversified. I mean, again, like there's the impacts of things like meta-ethics changed huge amounts of the way that kind of modern philosophical thoughts happens in comparison to like previous iterations, and different philosophers who are sort of leading in their fields at the time where other new philosophers are coming up are going to be dismissed later down the line. Very few people are seriously talking about Descartes.
Can I make a recommendation for you, Beckett?
Sure.
Go look up. It's in his. It's in the 1844 economic and philosophical manuscripts. You can get a cheap version from Dover, but I'm sure you can also find it online for free. There is a section called The Critique of the Hegelian Dialectic and Philosophy as a Whole. I recommend you give that a short look. That's probably going to give you a bit of a boost in this area. But like once again, like the bare fact that somebody benefits from, let's say, approaches to thinking concepts, or to judgments about the relationships between, say, politics and autonomy, or the identity of communities or the parts or whatever, things like that, from some other philosopher, that's not going to make that person a disciple or thrall of that philosopher.
I don't think the argument is
is
disciple or thrallship, though. I think that's a bit of a red herring. Okay.
Well,
so
the
let me ask
reason.
you this.
Hang on, very very quickly. This is actually somewhat important. So the thing that I was going to bring up is that the initial basis of the conversation, the initial reason why we had a disagreement in the first place. Let's get you back on the screen. Was that Phenomics had said this. Marx says liberalism has failed to deliver on its values. Radical liberals say, yeah, we know it's because the wealthy slow down our mission. Will you join us? And then Marx cuts them off. So we need to invent a whole new ideology based on Hegel for some reason. Marx's approach is entirely contra Hegel. It is counter Hegel to such an extent that it's taking for granted a lot of the points of importance that Hegel takes for granted. But Marx argues that Hegel's actually deeply mistaken about the critical things, which is why most of his earlier writings are specifically targeted at showing how Hegel is wrong. Like, for example, what's the difference in your opinion, Beckett, if any, is the difference between Hegel and Marx's conception of the state in its most advanced form? Do you know anything about that?
I'm not sure I remember what Hegel's conception was. Give me Hegel's.
Okay, well, in very rough strokes, it's been a hot minute. Hegel's incredibly difficult to understand, but he is very particular, and this is actually one of the problems. Hegel's conception of the state is essentially a deep elaboration on the Rousseauian conception of the ideal state, which is a state comprised of subjects that understands themselves in their relation to the whole, that makes laws for itself, that is therefore free as an entity, and is self-aware as an entity. So you have both the autonomy of the body and its parts in harmony with each other. That's the resolution of Hegel's politics in a nutshell. And somebody who's read this more recently can probably tear me to shreds on this. But the crucial point is that Marx's critique of Hegel's conception of the ideal state is precisely that he lands at the Prussian form of the state as the ideal form, whereas Marx's entire line of argument is going to be that no, there is no ideal state in germ within humanity or within the world to which we reason ourselves to it as to like a perfect point of self-understanding and freedom. This is itself particularly contingent and presumes the fetishization and the perpetuation of institutions that are accidental and in fact maintain class conflict in the end. They maintain relationships of exploitation that don't admit of seeing each other as free and equal beings and having the level of freedom that and self-awareness that comes from that specific type of relationship. He has a radically different view of the notion that I'm not even going to attempt to explain like the critique of Hegel's idealism, but no, he's the ultimate anti-Hegelian. In fact, he's from a tradition of anti-Hegelians. Feuerbach's Essence of Christianity, I think, was formational in him as a criticism of Hegel as well.
Okay, no, do you know what? Maybe you are actually winning me over to it.
Yeah. By the way, Marx's criticism of Hegel is sometimes unfair. Sometimes he doesn't get Hegel as well either. No, that's kind of rich coming from me, since my grasp of Hegel is obviously sloppy,
to be clear, I have a very clear. Do you know what? I think part of it, and might be why you're winning me over, is I do have a very strong anti-Hegel bias.
It's the cardigan.
No, it's definitely not the cardigan. But it's the way I view Hegel is Kant is very difficult to read and quite complex, but it seems to be necessary when Kant is writing in his complexity. Whereas I can't remember who I read, but there was a critique of Hegel from his period, from one of the other professors at the university he lectured at. Where the critique was basically Hegel's not saying anything. He's just making things sound complex. And because I am very used from my own academic background to reading professors who write things that are trash, but in a complex way, it gives... I'm happy to admit I may just have a bias against Hegel, where because I view him as far more simplistic than he is.
He's substantially more complex than even Marx treats him. But I think with Hegel has a high buy-in in terms of intelligibility. Hegel is extremely difficult. Hegel is responding to problems in Kant that are already themselves extremely difficult to wrap your head around, and he's working through an extremely fine-grained what's called immanent critique. What that means is that your critique is of the concepts taken by themselves internally. You're looking at their constituent elements, what they imply about themselves, and so on and so forth. That requires a lot of really meandering, looping description that can be difficult to follow. And so one of the experiences a lot of people who read like the Phenomenology of Spirit will have, I recommend if you want to like get a taste of Hegel, The Philosophy of Right is his last book, and it's, in my opinion, and this may just be because it's not in German and I don't know the difference, in my opinion, it's a lot more readable than the Phenomenology of Spirit. It comes with a lot of similar content. And you'll also get his politics for the latter half of it. What you'll find is you'll be reading this super convoluted, long, not nonsensical, but very difficult to follow description of a relationship between a subject and an object, say, and the changes that occur in both the perception of the thing and the perception of the self through the looping perceptions and whatever between the subject and the thing, because you become aware of objects in the world. You become aware of the differentiation between you and the object. You become aware of yourself as a subject perceiving. You become aware of the perception. You become aware of the perception of the perception. And like how you think yourself and how you do like knowledge acquisition in science is rapidly evolving in radical ways just over the course of living. So like it's very difficult to follow, and he's working out things in a very fine-grained way that like he's not a very readable philosopher. Like people complain about Kant being a bad writer. I don't know if this is just a matter of translation, but Hegel is borderline unreadable depending on the translation. But it's not because he's not making sense. That's because the thing that he's doing is extremely hard. He's a very advanced philosopher. Like there are people in every era who will be responding to someone who had something really profound and serious to say that was difficult, and they'll mock them for it because it makes them feel good, and there's a large readership who really wants to feel that way. Like, for example,
I think Hegel's not helped by. I think Hegel's not helped by the way he's presented by Hegelian fans. Again, like,
I agree with you, but let me modify that a little bit.
He's far away from the philosophers, because you got to remember, I like reading Hobbes, and
you'll learn to hate Hobbes eventually if you get to my level. But
fuck off. Leviathan's a great book.
It is a great book.
Rousseau.
It is a great book.
Rousseau.
It is a great book,
listen.
and it's so great. Do you know why it's great? Because it sows the seeds of its own destruction.
Fuck you. Listen, like, I'm not defending feudal systems, but I do like Hobbes, and like I like Sartre. So, you know, I'm not perfect, but I'm not perfect, but I will admit that potentially,
you know what you'll get
in the same way some people really fucking hate Aquinas because of his fans.
What's your? I mean, Aquinas is fascinating. Aquinas actually is a revolutionary thinker in his own right, and he shouldn't be hated.
Sure, there's a reason he's a doctor of the church.
Thomas, that's separate. But like Thomists in present day, idiots. But Aquinas, no, Aquinas is very brilliant. Have you read Rousseau by chance?
Not as good as Augustine. Sorry, go on ahead. Have I read what?
I think taken as a whole, I would tend to agree in terms of...
City of Gods Against the Pagans is a masterpiece. It is an actual masterpiece.
I agree.
City of Gods Against the Pagans.
But I mean, so is the Summa. I would say that.
Sure, but also, I mean, even Confessions is good. Sorry, like, this is just weirdly me going to be defending.
Confessions is good.
There's a reason. I did my undergrad dissertation on City of God Against the Pagans, so I've got a special place for that book in my heart. Anyway, yes, go.
Big book. Have you read Rousseau's Discourses or the Social Contract by chance?
Think I've only read Noble Savage.
Okay, that's going to be he doesn't write a book called The Noble Savage, but the Noble
No, I
Savage,
know, but
what you're thinking of is the second,
I've only read his thoughts on the Noble Savage.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is the second discourse on the origins of inequality. My recommendation would be to give those two a read. They're not long. Reread them again very carefully. You'll get a stronger sense of what Hegel's doing. You'll also get one of the definitive refutations of Hobbes, and Hobbes has never recovered, unfortunately. But he, too, likewise, was mocked by contemporaries who said, for example, because Rousseau's contention in the first discourse on whether the arts and the sciences improve public morals or something like that, I can't remember the exact title, was critiqued saying, Rousseau wants us to return to going on all fours like beasts. And Rousseau's point in that essay was precisely that the arts and the sciences don't improve morals, rather they actually create conditions of need in human beings. We develop writing, now we can't imagine living without it. We develop certain types of clothing, now we can't imagine being exposed to the elements in this particular way. Yet clearly, we survived for very long periods of time in nature without these things. Which we certainly know that the world is longer than we thought it was when Rousseau was writing. And so it seems to be that the arts and the sciences don't improve morals. It seems they actually condition us to need things that create impediments to morals. We end up being more high maintenance, so to speak. And so his retort to somebody saying Rousseau wants us to retreat to being brutes in the wilderness is like, well, no, I'm much too enamored with society as it is. Like, I'm conditioned as a type of creature that absolutely needs the arts and the sciences to even survive. And yet, isn't that on some level a weakness? He's not arguing that we should go back. His point is that the human subject is conditioned by its technological and by its cultural inventions and things like that. Like, what we actually are is the product of what we have made of the world and of ourselves, and that changes us irrevocably. And the reason why this is a refutation of Hobbes is precisely because Hobbes' argument for the state of nature being a state of war of all against all is you take human beings with their defensive need for property and things like that, their greed, their avarice, their pride, etc., and you project them back into a state without government, a situation in which there is no rule to hold them all in awe. They'll tear each other limb from limb until they form a state themselves. However, Rousseau's point is precisely that we don't have we should not presume the existence of the things that give rise to pride and to property and so on and so forth in advance of the state which makes us secure those and need those. Obviously the actual evolution of society must have taken place along different lines, because he has to presume the modern bourgeois subject in order to get a state of nature. That's Rousseau's point. And Rousseau is going to be heavily refined in people like Kant and Hegel. So if you get Rousseau, they'll make a lot more sense. That's my strong recommendation.
Yeah, no, that is fine. And again, like with people like Kant, from my academic background, again, I'm a theologian, not a philosopher, so I'm obviously going to read some of these people through different lenses. Like when I'm reading Kant, I'm reading him in much more of a theological sense than I am a philosophical sense, at least from like an academic background. I do have just as a pivot, because I know you have to go. What's your opinion on meta-ethics and like people like Lyotard?
I haven't read Lyotard. On meta-ethics generally? Depends on what you mean. Most meta-ethics is actually just ethics.
Sure. I mean, things like so for instance, meta-narratives.
Like just narratives of narratives?
So what's a good way to put this? It's fine if you haven't read it. This wasn't like a gotcha or anything, because I was just genuinely interested in the opinion.
No, I want to know exactly what you're saying, because if the point of reference is
so for instance, with a meta narrative, basically it's the idea of somebody who's talking about anything that's fundamentally true. So like the story with Lyotard, as Lyotard was interviewed about meta ethics and meta narratives. The interviewer said, "Okay, so your basic argument is never trust anybody with a meta-narrative." And he said, "Yes." And they said, "Isn't that itself a meta-narrative?" "Yes, don't trust me on it."
I think that's more of a maxim than a meta-narrative. Like when you say meta-narrative, what I think is like something like what Joseph Campbell is doing, where there's like a theory that operates outside of, but which determines the structure of narrative in some sense. That's what I think of when I hear the phrase meta-narrative.
More in relation to ethics, so it's like fundamental ethical truths, for example.
Yeah, I think you're just talking about maxims at that point. And so I mean, I think ultimately they kind of rest apropos of nothing, because ethics is like, when we're talking about ethics, we're talking about the construction of systems of norms, or just taking systems of norms for themselves. We're not really talking about a thing that is necessarily arrived at via observation of the natural world. So like the critique that Marx levied against Hegel, which is where he simply reifies the Prussian state as the ideal end goal of politics and philosophy, can be put back on Aristotle as well. It does the exact same thing with the Greek polis. He assumes that because the polis produces certain types of human beings with certain types of qualities that he dubs virtues because of their benefit to the society, that therefore the polis is itself the telos, the ultimate good of human beings as a species, and that therefore ethical considerations have to aim towards the maximization of the traits that conduce to the well-being of the species, and the maximization of those traits as well. Your sub specie aeternitatis, like from the eye of nature, I don't think any of these things really have any compulsion. Our scientific understanding seems to be of how we emerged as creatures in the world is a series of a combination of chance happenings and sort of inevitable dynamics of particles in motion. It's like wherein would an ethical maxim actually exist in the world? If it's just something we sort of say and take as a rule, like does it exist up there somewhere? Like where is it? And if it doesn't exist,
this is sort of, I always like the kind of practice-esque, show me one molecule of mercy, one atom of justice, but we talk about these things as though they have real weight or consistency.
Well, I mean, mercy and justice are dynamics of social relations. Like you can have mercy, but for example, to say that a thing is right is a bit of a different statement. You're not using a shorthand description of a complex emotional and social relation. You're saying there is a measure and a rule somewhere that rates this thing as better than this other thing.
But we talk about fairness, we talk about equality, we talk about justice, we talk about all those things as though they have tangibility within our language, and that's partly how humans work. That's how we work.
Well, I think the difference would be is that we're talking about like justice simply, unless we are referring specifically to fairness, in which case we can sort of weigh presentations of different claims on a thing and decide that this looks kind of equal, therefore fair. That's a thing we can do. It refers to something that we have some kind of grasp on. But if we're saying
even our definitions of fairness change over time, because fairness used to have far more components of status. So, for example, actually, like now we'd say that if you're in a position of authority or or privilege, then like there's an equity element to fairness where it's not just an equal distribution. Whereas previously it was like, well, if you're in that, let's take African tribal relations in current world, like elders within tribal groups are given far more esteem, therefore they get more. So that equity actually goes in reverse and is thought of as fair. So there's no it's not just a balancing thing. There are overall human interactions to fairness, but that's not how we talk about fairness. We talk about fairness and we talk about these other concepts.
No, because like for example, so if you go back to Plato's Republic
purity.
and his talk about justice, like the conception of justice that Socrates arrives at is essentially everything in its place with doing what it's supposed to do without interfering with anything else. So the question becomes, where the fuck did you find that map of where its place is? Because if you're going to assert that things have a place, well, what you're talking about is like something somewhere like a laser corresponds to the position of things in the world, and this thing can be in its wrong place or it can be in its right place. That's a heavy claim.
There's a reason that Plato is called a Christian before Christ.
Well, there's a reason why Platonism was so amenable to Christianity, sure. And I mean, It doesn't help, for example, there's a lot of Platonic language loaded into some of the Gospels, but yeah. I gotta run. I have
no worries
for me. And guys, we will
I've got somebody else who wants me to host a debate between you and Jenny at some point.
Jenny Matrix?
Yeah. Would you be happy for me to moderate?
Sure. What's it about again? It might have to take a little bit because if I'm switching modes, like the Marx thing is consuming.
No, that's fine, buddy. That's fine.
But I have no objections in principle. Just my usual is at least 2 weeks to prepare, and right now my 2 weeks are full up. I've got 3 things coming up. I've got the Cop City panel in 4 days.
I'll DM you.
Yeah.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I know you're debating a lot more than I am. This has been fun. It's nice to have a conversation.
Yeah, we'll talk again. Econoboi, nice to meet you. I'll see you again on the 29th. Have a good night, both of you.
Yes, sir.
Cheerio.
All right, talk to you later, bud.
All right. I am going to send you somewhere. Where am I going to send you? Let's see. We'll do the live stream. The Revolution will not be live stream video later. Looks like Demon Mom is not live. How about... We'll send you to, You Guys Talking History is like there's like 5 different videos. Is Lucy alive? Oh, Riverboat Jack is not live. Shoot. Okay. Oh, there's never anybody to raid. Drives me up a wall. Xanderhole, maybe? No. Beckett of Crabs isn't even live on YouTube. Alright, I'll send you to food shops. Cheerio. And I'll see you all tomorrow.